this week.
Well, there's another storm on the horizon, and the lightning is crazy, but it looks like it's pretty far away, so I don't have a care in the world. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Mine was fine all day, and then I saw sort of when I first got in here that it was kind of struggling a little bit, and I was like, damn it.
Oh, man. Well, we're here. We're ready. We're live.
We are. It's episode 172. I think at the rate we're going, we might beat THP in terms of the number of episodes by the time, like the race to 200.
Nice.
THP's at like 195 or 6.
Okay.
I don't know, but
all right.
Yeah, 172, part of the Herpetoculture Network, which is brought to you by BlackBoxCages.com. Check them out. Facebook, Instagram. If you get a rack, if you get a cage, use the code at checkout, THN, T as in Tom, H as in hen, N as in Ned.
What the hell was that phonetics?
That's the phonetic. That's the official Navy SEAL phonetic alphabet.
Nice.
The phonetic codes.
All right.
Yeah, save yourself some money. Use that code. You can use the same code at fulviusapparel.com. That's just for THP listeners and watchers. So if you're here and you hear it, you want to buy something, be it shirt, hats at some point. I am working on the Subok hat. I'll have you know.
Yes.
I worked on it for about 30 seconds this morning before I got distracted by other stuff at work.
Excellent. Good. Yes.
So
yes.
Coming soon. And then I have I got a sweet deal on a cricket machine off Facebook. So I got some decals I'm working on that I'll also have up on the site, like the Morelia head stamp one that I have. I'll have that as a decal. I got a bunch of other ideas that I made strictly just for the decal thing. So
nice.
I'll have those up here soon.
Well, I am wearing my Corrales.
You are. Look at that.
I am. Look at that. Look at those colors. This lighting does not do it justice.
Originally, I was just going to have that be like yellow or something, I think. And then I was like, you know what? Let me slap a gradient on it and see what happens. And then it did that. And I was like, okay.
Let me get closer.
I like
Look at that.
So
love it.
FullVisApparel.com, FullVis Apparel on Facebook and Instagram. Give it a follow. Help your boy out.
When is the Bitis shirt going to be available?
That is actually up on the website.
Son of a bitch. You did it. I'm in.
And then here, I'm about to text you. So in my trial and error with this cricket machine, I just finished like weeding this decal. It's a Bitis decal, just so everybody's curious. But trying to get it all figured out and trying to learn another machine and another program. So,
dude, that is going to be a nightmare to
it won't be that bad. Oh no, it wasn't actually. So I had to mess with the needle pressure or the blade pressure settings a little bit.
Can I show on screen?
It actually came out way easier than the other ones did. It probably doesn't. I need to get more color vinyl. I literally went to Walmart when I got this machine and got like 2 rolls of different colors just to try and learn with. So we're anyways, working that out. So those will be on the website soon-ish. And then Puget Sound Pythons, check them out. Facebook, Instagram, Morph Market. Hunt them down, see what they've got up for grabs. Wade through the chaos that is Morph Market. And hunt them down, follow them, stay in the loop with what they're doing. So, and then shout out to Rob Stone. Rob Stone is my hero.
Rob Stone is our hero.
I was
lives.
Doing some shirts today, and I was like, you know what? Enough's enough. I've been talking about doing this for like 2 years. I'm just gonna do it. Today's the day. So I slapped it together and I printed it, and here we are.
Looks great, man. Looks great.
We love us some Rob Stone here at this network.
In Stone we trust.
In Stone we trust. Most in Stone, we salute you. But what's new? What's going on with you?
I am back in the Bitis. I I've always kept Bitis. I love Bitis. I can't afford the tiny ones because they're too tiny and too adorable. Um, but I've always had a handful, just pets, just to kind of represent the genus. And I still have a very, very large adult female, but she's very old, very, very old, and I have a feeling that she's not going to be around for much longer. But I wanted to get back into puffs. My puff died last year out of the blue. I mean, the thing was probably like 7 or 8 years old, but I mean, still, he just rolled out of nowhere, and I have no idea why. So I've been puffless, as you'd say. And yesterday, I wound up getting 2.2 KwaZulu-Natal Cape Puffs. I got a pair of neonates and I got
Those
a pair of
nice.
adults. Dude, that's what I was actually just doing upstairs. I was moving them from container to container, and from container to CB70. And it's so crazy, the contrast in different lighting and different background. Like I had them on newspaper and they were like, man, these are great looking animals. And then I put them on cypress mulch and I was like, oh my God, it slapped me in the face, metaphorically speaking, of course. But I'm stoked, man. And like they're probably my favorite of the puffs because they only get maybe 30 inches, 32 inches max. They're not a big puff. I mean, some of the puffs get gigantic, like that video that's going around right now from Mali.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, those West African puffs get huge, but we rarely get stuff out of South Africa. And when we do, it's usually an arm and a leg. So I had a great opportunity, and now I'm back in the puff game. And
I like them because they're like a Desai in puff form.
Yes, that's exactly what Nipper said. That's exactly. I sent Nipper the picture of the male after it shed, and he was like, you could tell like he was typing, like you saw the dots in the bottom, and then you stop, and then you saw the dots again,
frantically starting and stopping.
Yeah. And he went up calling me this afternoon. We bullshitted for a minute, and he's like, mate, I thought it was Desai. So it's good, man. They're good looking snakes.
3
right?
times the size.
Yeah, I know, right? Dude, the thing is literally the thickness of my wrist.
Crazy.
It's killer, man. Stoked. So, and as for smokes tonight, I never got to smoke that Placencia. 149. Yeah. So it's still cut. I just put it back in the box, and we're gonna rock and roll with that tonight. So what do you got on deck?
So I was just finishing up a Adobe that I didn't finish earlier, but I have a diesel vintage. I don't know if any can see that, but
dude, they have the coolest band, man.
I smoked one. This one does. I think the Toro is like $8.95, so it's not an expensive smoke. I smoked one the other day, and it wasn't anything life changing. It wasn't horrible either, so I'm gonna smoke it again and give it a shot. And then he has some new Saka, so Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. He's got one of the new limited lines from him that are like $20 a stick that I really like. Saka's stuff is something, if you see Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust, ask them when they put it on the shelf, because that is a brand overall that I have found. If you smoke it fresh, like they just opened a box and put it on the shelf, it is not going to be nearly as good as if you give those suckers, 2 or 3 weeks of sitting before you smoke them. And I'm patiently waiting to give one of those a shot. So that'll be for Snakes and Stogies in the next couple weeks. But anxious to try one. It's part of his Mike Rita stuff. So it's bound to be decent. You're muted.
Every time. I was just saying excellent. Before we introduce our guest, anything else you want to touch base on that's new in your world?
Nothing too crazy. All the hypocorns that I hatched out, all but 1 ate right off the rip. I'm gonna weigh everybody Saturday and see where we're at. So interestingly, I weighed them over the weekend on Saturday. Before I fed them, because that's the way I'm going to do it. Is I'm going to feed them, and then Saturday I'll weigh them, and then I'll feed them again, and then repeat. I've been averaging the weights as well, and what I'm actually going to end up doing is splitting into the 2 groups, like the cut pinks and the not cut, and the average dropped just from 722 until Saturday. They went from 6.68 grams on average to 6.19 grams on average, which is a considerable drop given it was only a week. So again, I'm going to split the two groups up and do the averages for both for each, and then probably keep doing the overall average for everybody. So we'll see. I'm interested to see what this first weigh-in after that first meal looks like, and hopefully this non-starter will kick in, because if he refuses this coming weekend, then he's going to be pulled from that study. Or I'll continue to probably weigh him until it takes off, just to see. You know, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, one animal is not going to be a great interpretation of data, but to see have one that's like really struggling to see just what's going on weight wise over the course of the same timeline as everything else, it'll be interesting. But the Het Castagna and Het Motley stuff, those are all due to start shedding here soon, which I'm really excited about, because those things came out of the egg with some just screaming oranges on them. Interested to see what's going on there. If those hets have any influence on any of that kind of stuff. I don't think they will, but we'll see. They may end up looking slightly different than normal corn. I don't know. But other than that, got a Baird's clutch. That first Baird's clutch is supposed to hatch any day. I don't even know what day I'm at. It's got to be pushing 70 and change, 70 something, I think.
Okay. Okay.
I moved him into the room, moved him into a bigger egg container, because the egg box I had him in, they were, there was a couple eggs that were like touching the lid and it was getting some condensation and stuff. So I just moved him into a bigger, more open tub that when they do hatch, they have enough room to kind of get under the moss and
nice. Did you can you hear that alarm?
Yeah.
Very faintly. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, it's lightning alarm.
That's pretty cool.
Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, that was like the get inside, it's coming, it's actually from the middle school down the street.
Women and children last.
Yeah, women and mogs first. I was gonna say is you were talking about did you take the egg box and take the lid off and then put that whole box into another box, or did you actually transfer them?
Actually transferred them.
Oh, geez. You're ballsy. I love it.
Well, see, if I was smart, the problem is it's a Sistema box that I used, and I have those Carolina scorpions in the other one. They were bigger. Okay. So if I was smart, I'd move those devil scorpions into something else and then have that other box ready to go with some spag, and then I just have to move the eggs. Instead, I have to like set the eggs over to the side, put the spag in that box, and then move the eggs on it. So
it's all right.
If it were like chondro eggs or something delicate, I wouldn't be doing that. But they're rat snakes, they're corn snakes, I ain't worried about it.
Well, I actually went out to Central Glades last night and wound up getting my I don't even know, I guess you call it Broward County. Got my first ever Broward County corn that I could actually keep, because every time I find corns in Broward County, it's always on protected areas, so I can't take anything home, So I actually got one, and I was hoping it would be that same Miami-ish coloration as the other one that Marcus got me, but when I get it home and like the actual light of the house, not just headlights, it's very different. It's very normal looking, but I kept him because he's cool looking. It looks like it might be a girl. We'll see. I'll get some meals in them and go from there. So
me and Jake, what's today? Friday. Jake and I went and cruised the Okeechobee Hunt Club.
Nice.
There's state roads that go through there that are public access. It rained a lot Friday night, so I wasn't expecting much, because it was like raining really hard, and then it'd stop a little bit, and then it'd come down again, and just in sheets, and then it'd stop again. And I was like, told Jake, I was like, I don't know if it's worth going out, because it's just, if it was done raining, like we got a really good hard rain, and it was done, I think it would have been perfect. But because it kept sort of off and oning like that, saw some Neurodia,
okay,
and garter. and a ton of frogs, ton of toads.
Nice.
So it was actually, I want to get out there again because it was freaking gorgeous out there. That's the first time I had actually been on the hunt club, like in it.
Nice.
And it's really nice out there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean that's about it though as far as updates go.
Good, man. We both had good updates. I'm glad to hear it. But we have a guest, and I'm sure that guest has updates. Would you care to do the honors, Smitty?
Yeah, so this is something we've had in the works for a couple weeks now. We wanted to coincide the show with Frog Week 2023, and we're joined here by Mr. Aaron Capouellez of Woods and Forests. I mean, would you consider Woods and Forests media, or is it just Woods and Forests?
Well,
overall,
it gives you a dilemma because I'm the founder and president of the nonprofit, and I'm also the owner of the media brand. So either one you want to call it, because it's a collaboration project. So the nonprofit is doing the field work, and I'm filming it and narrating it and doing all the other stuff. So if you want to say it's a Woods and Forests media project, either way, I mean, I'm just happy to be on the show. So, I mean, however you want to introduce it.
Well, that actually it worked out well because Phil was telling me a couple weeks ago about the time that you had, we had gotten in contact. Phil was like, "Man, we need amphibians. We need to talk salamanders and frogs and stuff and
toads."
I was like, "What perfect timing?" Because, then we got in contact and we made it happen. So we made Phil's wish come true.
Oh yeah.
Phil, you were manifesting me on the show. It's awesome. I appreciate it, man.
That's right.
It was you were putting it out in the ether, and I got that sizzly static electricity.
You could feel it all the way in South Florida,
all the way from Pennsylvania down the East Coast.
Yes, sir. Yeah, like I said, I'm really excited to be a part of this and to be talking with you guys. I've seen the show a good bit, and so I'm just really excited. But yeah, I mean, I'm really happy to bring amphibians on the show and talk about them and talk about a little bit of this project. A lot of people probably don't know, but there's actually a conservation project up here in Pennsylvania that I started in 2019, and we've just been trying to get people to care about frogs and toads that are native to the Northeast. And it's crazy now, like the feedback, multiple newspapers, and I'm not going to give anybody a spoiler alert probably that's watching this, but in the local area that I'm from, the news actually wants to do a news story about it, which is kind of cool because a lot of times these types of animals get overlooked. And so,
oh yeah,
I don't know. I think about it as a major win for a lot of this project. The thing is, what I see is like these videos tend to be a slow burn for whatever reason. So it might start out a little bit slow, but then, you give it a day, a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months, and then I'll come back and I'll see like, oh, so the audience jumps on later. I don't know why that is. I'm hoping we can get a better turnout, but I know that the tendencies of the channel and the tendencies of the followers, it seems like, they get on whenever they want to get on, no matter how much you poke them. But I mean, you guys probably know about that too, being on social media.
Yeah, you got to give it time for people to share it, and spread the gospel, so to speak.
Yeah,
that's one thing that is interesting looking at sort of the analytics just from the audio version of this stuff alone is like the amount of people that listen days after it's been uploaded. You would think that it would be kind of an instantaneous sort of crest and then things would sort of level out a little bit, but it seems like it spikes and sort of stays spiked, and then it'll kind of, by the time the next episode comes out, it seems to kind of taper off some again. But it's weird. It's not what you would think it would be. But
I think it's also deceiving too, because a lot of the analytics, it'll show you, like, if you're not paying attention to how it's all laid out. First of all, every server website's got it laid out differently, but it'll have it like by the hour or even by the day. And you'll look at it, you're like, man, it only got 2 plays today. Like 2 people in the whole world listened to it or watched it. And then you'll come back like 18, 20 hours later and it'll be like 500. Like, how did that happen? So we just got to give them time to spread that word.
On my analytics for you guys, I'm sorry, not my analytics, my news feed, it comes up like a couple of days later. Sometimes I'll get it on like a Wednesday, or I'll get it on a Friday, or I'll get it on like a Sunday. I don't know. It's weird. It just seems like as I'm scrolling, then it just starts to come up. But if I'm not like really on Instagram, like it'll at some point come up, but it doesn't come up like as quickly as what I thought it would.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how, like, all the algorithms and those things, it's constantly changing. I don't even try to, beat it anymore or figure it out. It's just whatever. Put it out there, and if people find it, they find it. It's kind of my my approach at this point. But we do actually have, I put a link to either your channel or that first episode that you dropped today in the description, so if you're watching this on Facebook or Instagram, not Instagram, YouTube, just right down below, give it a look, watch it, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check it out. I did watch the first episode, which dropped this afternoon. And it brought up a lot of questions that I had, which, we'll get into, but we'll sort of kick it off, I guess, with sort of a general introduction as far as your background in herps and sort of how you came to start the F&W or W&F project and all that good stuff. Why amphibians too?
A lot of good questions. Well, I'll try to be brief here and not go too deep into detail here and into the weeds, but
no, dude, dive in, man. Head
dive
first.
in.
Dive in. That's what the show's about.
All right. Well, all right. I'll give it my best shot here. So I'm a graduate student in IUP at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and I'm in the biology department. I'm actually focused on herpetology and mostly frogs and toads. I didn't actually start in biology. I started in communications at a branch campus of the University of Pittsburgh in my hometown. And originally I wasn't planning on even going for biology. And I'd grown up for a long time, like being exposed to ponds and being exposed to frogs and toads, more so than others, like more than reptiles and even salamanders. But I'd always seen them, and there was a long period of time where I wasn't in the hobby, didn't really want anything to do with it. And I was doing landscaping at a local plant nursery. And every time I'd be out into the field, this was like landscaping in the plant nursery, but I'd be out in the field and we'd be working, whether it's bagging mulch, building a greenhouse or whatever, like moving plants. And you'd see the American toads always hanging out with us. They'd always just kind of look at us like, what are you doing here? Like, why are you in my home? I'd be eating isopods and stuff and just really chill. And I just thought that was really cool. And I don't know, I just had an interest in wanting to work with them and bring attention to them. And actually, the ironic part is I first wanted to get into this because of the northern leopard frog and the American toad. But the main animal was the northern leopard frog, because in Pennsylvania, a lot of people don't know this unless you lived in a location where they used to exist. But northern leopard frogs are one of the fastest declining species in Pennsylvania. And a lot of people don't even know that are hanging out, like living in the counties where they used to exist. They still think that they're there, but there's a lot of data right now that shows that they're not there. So knowing that going into it, I wanted to raise awareness for that animal. And I really always could find American toads. They were always reliable. But it really changed whenever I got a female American toad, Ace, at that same plant nursery years later. I was talking about her a little bit before we started. I think this whole story, maybe it'll take off and people will be interested in checking this part out. But in the plant nursery that I worked at, they dig holes and then they put big pots in the ground, and then they put the trees in those pots in the wintertime, and like when it's going to get cold and there's a frost, so the trees don't die. But in the springtime, they pull them out. So now they're just like pitfall traps all over the place. Well, some of the toads will fall in there, and for years, probably over 10 years now, I'd go down there and I'd get them out and rescue them. And I just really wanted an American toad when I was first starting out. So this is to give you a timetable. I got my first ever frog, like really getting into it, in 2014. It was a White's tree frog, and she's still with me. Her name's Max. I thought she was a male at first before I really was getting into all the hobbyist stuff. But anyway, Ace is probably the most influential, most interesting or inspirational animal to me because as time went on, I had these ideas. I wanted to build this like Pennsylvania themed enclosure, and I also wanted to make people care about them. And I thought, man, this is the perfect toad to do it with because she's got a lot of personality, a lot of character. I got her young, so I got the chance to see her very early in life, how she was going to behave. And when I was at Pitt, the branch campus, Pitt Johnstown, it was my first year there. And like I said, I was going for communications. I don't have any regrets going for that. But I had heard rumors about this guy who was a herpetologist on campus, and there's only one of them. And some of the other people were like, oh, you got to meet him. You got to meet him since you're talking about frogs and toads so much. And I kind of explained to him where I was at, what I was trying to do with my life. And he thought, man, you're just so passionate about this. You really need to think about going for a career or transitioning or just thinking about going to school for this because you're really, really interested in this and you're really passionate. But honestly, it was the first time I thought about it because I knew how intense the math requirements were going to be and all the chemistries and everything else. And I told him, I was like, man, I don't know if I can like handle that. I'm not like a scholarly student and you're asking me to take calculus and, organic chemistry and all this other stuff. And I'm like,
I feel your pain, man.
So I was like really on the fence, and he slowly was talking some confidence into me and building me up through that whole semester. It was like February when he'd started talking with me, and it was even before that. So I'll back it up a couple months. Ace had been going through some very serious health problems. I didn't know back then, just starting out, that American toads and other wild frogs and toads carry parasites. And no matter how good of the care is that you take, you handle your animals with, they'll still get those parasites. They'll get an overload and they can die. So that actually was where Ace was headed. She was sick and she was starting to prolapse. She probably prolapsed about 4 or 5 times, which is crazy that she survived that, to think about it now looking back, because I look at all these different Facebook groups that I'm a part of, and all these animals are having a prolapse and then the next day they die. So Ace is a really tough toad to be able to go through all of that and still want to eat and still want to live. So I called the Pittsburgh Zoo and I had asked them, do they have a herpetologist? Do they know somebody who can help her? Like, is there something I can do? Because like the local vet just wanted to put her down. She was literally 3 days away from being put down. It was like a Hail Mary attempt. The Pittsburgh Zoo sent me a phone number of who to call. I called the wrong person, but it was the right vet, because the vet that I called actually saved her life. And then what happened after that is kind of like, they say, history, because I said, all right, like, this is the promise I'm going to make to this little toad. Seeing as I was going through a challenging time in my life, the fact that she was so resilient, she wasn't willing to die when the odds were stacked against her, it really made me take a different perspective on life. And so I was like, you know what? You're going to get the best toad tank that anybody's ever built on the earth. And I'm trying to live true to that promise. I finally got that tank. We could talk about it later on if you want. But not only that, I wanted to get into conservation and I wanted to help these animals, because like that just won me over completely after that, seeing how she just overcame it and then watching her story unfold. Now it's been 5 years since she had those prolapses, and she's probably around 7 or 8 for a female American toad. I mean, they can live much longer than that, which is good. But man, I'm just so thankful to have her. And yeah, she's like an icon in terms of the nonprofit and the media brand. So that's really where I started, was just wanting to make a difference. And she kind of was the driving force for that. And again, she inspired me to get back into school, like to really want to go for biology. And now I'm in the graduate program. I can't even believe that. But it's crazy stuff.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, that's a species, or even a group for that matter, because just that overall, that sort of clade with toads in America. We have a handful of species down here in South Carolina, and we have spadefoots and stuff. And you don't really see people, at least that I've noticed, keeping those, even though they seemed like they would make awesome captives if you set them up right.
Totally.
The right person needs to get them, because it costs a lot of money, because you got to fight that battle every year deworming them, and you've got to make sure they have a varied diet. Because American toads, but you bring up a great point, Fowler's toads and southern toads, even spadefoots that are a little bit different than everybody. they all are generalists, so they eat so much variety out in the wild. And a lot of people make the mistake by, well, I'll just feed crickets and mealworms. And I'm not necessarily saying that's what I did, because I get a lot of my stuff from Josh's Frogs. Shout out to them. But no, I was even using Herpcal. I was using all that stuff. I was using the calcium dust. I was trying to do everything I could that I'd learned, and it wasn't working out for the wild animals. So the vet sent me a peer-reviewed research paper about a Missouri gut load that you feed the crickets, the roaches, all that. And I switched the diet from all the inverts to that. And I'll tell you what, I can put weight on a frog. I can take weight off of a frog. I can do whatever that's necessary. I weigh them just like you're weighing your snakes. So, yeah, man, it's more than people give it credit for. And these animals will use more space than you'd think. That's one of the most misconstrued ideas about these animals is you see a lot of people put them in a shoebox or a 10-gallon, but man, Ace, she's going to get a 240-gallon once it's done. It's behind me. And I really am excited because I think she'll go the full length of the tank to hunt if she has to.
Sure. I got a couple guys by me that we call them the bug boys, because we always go out looking for different kinds of arthropoda. And he actually had like a little colony of spadefoots. And dude, I would go over his house to just hang out, and I'd be like, dude, what are the spadefoots doing tonight? And he had
I love those things, man. Little aliens.
Little aliens, man. And it was so crazy because they knew when food was coming. They knew what day of the week the food was coming, because he wouldn't feed them every day, but he would have this really long. I mean, the only way I could describe it is basically two CB70s like together.
Wow.
And he would slide this thing out and open the lid, and he had them just on what's the stuff, like what's the Eco Earth? Yeah, just like Eco Earth and some leaf litter, and each one made its own little divot pocket. It looked like the moonscape, and they would all be sitting in their little bubbles, just waiting for food to get dropped in.
Little foxholes.
Foxholes. Exactly. So, and our good friend Harry, he's in North Florida, and he's got, I'm assuming they're Southerns, but they might be Americans. I think he's north enough that he could probably get some Americans. And dude, he sits on his porch. Hopefully he's listening right now. He sits on his porch and he just hand feeds the wild ones. They all hang out with him.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, toads are
sit
where
there
it's
and
at,
drink
man.
a beer and smoke a cigar. And he's just throwing a bug.
Dude, American toads, man, it's where it's at.
You want to hear a crazy story about American toads?
Always.
Okay, so this comes from the Facebook group that I manage, but there's a friend of mine on there who's an admin, and he was telling people, and I think this is a true story, but don't quote me on this, but supposedly American toads know that moths and other insects will come to your yard lights, and so if they're motion sensor, the big female toads will actually set them off to get the insects to come to them. So
really,
there's a thought going on, and I don't know, you guys can kind of test this out too, since we're still in the summer, but if you're seeing American toads by your yard lights, or any frog for that matter, but let's just keep it to like toads. If you're seeing the toads hanging out by the yard lights, that could be why. That's a really interesting thing that they might have figured out. And if they did, I mean, imagine that'd be an amazing research study right there. That'd be pretty awesome to find out how did they figure that out, that the light brings them.
Well, I can't say that the ones by me are specifically jumping up and down to get the lights to turn on, but we have a ton of cane toads by me, man. It's honestly, it's one of the only toads we really find where I am. It's very suburban. And dude, you'll go out on the porch, like you forgot to turn the light off, and there'll be like 6 of them just chilling, just waiting for everything to fly in.
Like they're sitting in a back alley rolling dice or something.
Yeah, legit. Like they just got dominoes in the street, man. So
that is one thing that I've always sort of appreciated about them, though, is like you know, everyone has, at least if you live in the South anywhere, like you have a toad that hangs out in your flower beds and stuff, and it's like every night during summer, if those lights are on, they're chilling on your porch just waiting for stuff to hit the ground.
Dude, even out west,
and there's
man,
like no fear. Like you walk up and they just sit there and they're like, oh, you like they're surprisingly bold for an animal that has, you know, a considerable number of predators to.
Yeah, you know, you wouldn't think that.
Yeah, it's almost like they know they're toxic. Right?
We were recording one night probably a year or two ago, and I was just sitting here and a little spadefoot just came hopping in and just sat there and stared at me like, what are you doing?
Yeah, man. That's awesome.
Wild. This is the biggest spadefoot I'd actually seen.
That's cool, man. They're great. Love toads, man.
It's funny.
I'm definitely a toad guy, and like I've tried to get like to elbow deep into salamanders, and like my fiance has a dumpy, and dude, I love the dumpy, man, but I just feel like I'm a toad guy, man. I just am.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
you're in a really awesome spot because in the southeast, you guys have so many toads. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I mean the toad diversity is amazing. I mean, why wouldn't you be? The Fowler's toad is so unique, and you've got the southern toad, and in some spots, I don't know. I guess you're too far south for the American toad, but I
Yeah.
mean, you've got so many different toads. The spadefoot, even the invasive
narrow
king toad.
mouths.
Yeah, narrowmouths.
Yeah.
That's another cool
Narrowmouths
one.
are really
Even
interesting.
oak toads.
Yeah.
See, I've always seen pictures of oak toads, but I don't know that I've ever actually seen an oak toad here. And they're supposed to be native to my area, but I wonder maybe the Barrier Island thing might cause a hurdle there.
It very well might.
But I need to get better at identifying those and the southerns, and we have a handful of species here that I'm frankly really bad at identifying, but it's pretty much entirely because I haven't taken the time to really look at pictures and studied it to remember like this is what this is. But the oak toads, man, the pictures of those have always stood out to me. Just it's like a little cane break in toad form with that red stripe down the back. And
you want to hear something cool about oak toads? So there's a documentary by BBC America, and it was like plants behaving badly. So they were filming sundews. I think it was in the Carolinas. It could have been Florida. But anyway, it was really cool because they were showing the oak toads facing off against the sundews to steal the insects. And I just thought that was really neat that, the little toads knew as the sundews were like grabbing the prey, and they're pulling it in, the toads were able to grab it from the tentacles or whatever you want to call the actual part of the sundew that moves. But I just thought that was pretty neat that there's a competition going on in those bogs. Well, I guess he's out. He's going to go look for toads.
I think he's the weather is
Uh-oh.
Either that or he's got a phone call. Yeah, supposedly we have them here, and I maybe it's because they are considerably smaller than the southerns, right? Than a lot of other species.
Yep.
I don't know. I need to look because that's always been a species that stood out to me just from the pattern and the color and stuff.
Yeah.
And you would think, I guess, they'd be fairly easy to identify with that line going down the back like that, but I'm looking at some pictures of them now.
Yeah, they're really interesting.
I like those narrow mouths a lot, though. Those are that's a really interesting toad too.
Do you have them a lot where you're at? Like,
you
see them you see them pretty frequently.
Yeah. So my parents have a pool, and so this time of year, like that skimmer box, most of the time I'll go. So at my parents' house, they have like a barn type thing, and that's where I raise mice and rats and stuff. And so usually when I go there to check on the mice in the mornings, I'll go to the skimmer box and pull out whatever's alive and save it. And there's always a decent amount of narrow mouths in there. Not a ton of bullfrogs. I think I've only found a couple of bullfrogs in there actually, but narrow mouths and southerns and that there are plenty usually.
I'm gonna ask you to pause for 1 second because I couldn't talk about these toads and just sit there. So I had to go catch one.
I knew it. I knew it. What do you got there? Is it a southern toad?
No, it's a cane.
Oh, it's a cane toad?
Yeah. And he ran away from me for a second. I'm going to switch hands and unplug the headphones for a second. But
we're going to see how skilled he is of a juggler.
How many did you get peed on?
He's already peed on me like 3 times. And it's crazy because he's a triumphant little bastard. But there he is.
What's up, buddy?
Like, help
He's got some great coloration too, but he's got some growing to do. He's a little nugget.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But he lives in the patio. There's like 7 or 8 of them. So once the lights go out, the dog stays in.
Yeah. There's some cool stuff going on. People are taking cane toads they capture in Florida, and they're actually shipping them out to different locations as like ambassador animals to teach people about invasive species. And also, they make decent pets too whenever you get out of the range that they can invade.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I've kept them before, and they're good hardy toads, man. As long as you do like what you said, and you just set them up right, and don't assume they're going to live in a shoebox. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Especially them. I mean, they're pretty interesting. They can travel. I mean, I don't know if you heard what's going on in Australia, but they've actually seemed to have evolved to grow so that way they could get across the desert. That's a really
Uh,
Yeah,
crazy
it's
thing.
wild. Which I think is super interesting because by me, and I don't want to jinx it by saying this, so knock on wood. I've not yet found a cane toad in any kind of natural wilderness, like Everglades type by me. It's always in urban and suburban areas. And now I don't find spadefoots anymore in those areas. I don't find southern toads in those areas. I rarely ever find a narrow mouth in those areas. But when I go west, I find the other stuff, and I don't see cane toads. So that makes me really happy, which I think they know that the urban area is prime, so why leave, you know?
yeah.
I'm gonna go wash my hands, excuse me.
No problem.
I feel bad because I'll open that skimmer box and there will be a pair of them with the male in amplexus, and the female's been dead for a minute because they've been in
Oh.
that skimmer box, and he's still trying, man. But
Yeah, that's.
they're,
I mean, oh, go
I
ahead.
try to save as many of them as I can, that are still kicking.
So we actually see that a lot up here, especially like on the topic of Frog Week with wood frogs. So many of them will grab a hold of a female and they'll pull her to the bottom of a vernal pool or a pond or a puddle, like a large puddle. And, if she can't get up because there's so many of them, they'll actually drown her. And you wouldn't
Wow.
think that happens a lot, but I mean, it happens frequently enough. I mean, we see it a couple times a year. So yeah, that's the unfortunate situation. I haven't really seen it with American toads, but I assume that there are spots where that does happen when there's that many American toads, they're grabbing onto the female at the same
Mhm.
time. But yeah, mostly it's in wood frogs, and that's another animal that we prioritize, something that I keep even, and something that I find to be one of the most fascinating.
Yeah, I see. So it seems to be usually toads, be it not a ton of spadefoots, but I believe they're southerns, narrow mouths, and then every now and then we'll get like either a leopard or a pickerel frog. I couldn't tell you which one was which because they look so similar, but and every now and then a bullfrog. But it's weird that it's we have a ton of tree frogs, green tree frogs, squirrel tree frogs, and I really very rarely ever see tree frogs in that skimmer box, which I find interesting, but
Yeah.
I don't know. But what's the there are, you said 4 species that the project is sort of focused on. You mentioned the wood frog. What's the others that you're that are taking priority?
Well, in order, chronological order up here in Western Pennsylvania, the wood frog always comes out first. It usually comes out a few weeks before the American toad. So that's our first animal of the year that we start with. That's actually the first episode's target animal.
Mm-hmm.
And then the American toad comes out a little bit after that. There's like a very small breeding season for pickerel frogs. It's really an odd situation. They come out right around the end of the American toad breeding season, but they come out around the same time the gray tree frogs are breeding. So the pickerel frogs are kind of in that like really thin breeding season, and then the eastern gray tree frogs. So we have a little bit of diversity, some interesting animals. It's not just the bullfrog and the spring peeper, stuff that people know very commonly. I was trying to get a couple animals that people up north usually don't see. They don't normally see pickerel frogs, or in my area, they had never seen gray tree frogs. In a couple of the counties, we were actually the first to document them in a few of the counties that we've been working in. So, I have a rescued gray tree frog who is in episode 4. You guys can actually see the story about him coming out, I believe, on Thursday. And anyway, I take him to presentations and I'm asking the kids, I'm asking the adults, have you ever heard this frog before? Because I play frog calls with some of my presentations, and nobody raises their hand. Nobody says, oh, I've heard that, or I've seen that frog that you're holding. So they're just, I'm trying to go with more mysterious species, so that way we get people interested in a lot of different varieties of frogs rather than just, like I said, the bullfrog.
Yeah. Do you guys get the grays chorusing up by you or no?
Where I live exactly, no, but I have to travel in different locations to go and find them. So they're not in my area, and there's a lot of things I'm trying to uncover to figure out why that is. But in different parts, like they're north of me and they're also south of me, which is ironic. But um, I guess to give you an interesting story about this too, you'll find this out in episode 7. So that eastern gray tree frog that was a part of the presentations and the one who's the main animal who's like featured in Frog Week this year. So some time has gone by, and this is like May. No, this is like June, July, like late June, going into July, and there's a population of gray tree frogs that I hadn't found in the southern county, and I'd been trying to find them all year, couldn't find them, 0 for 3, and all of a sudden my frog in captivity starts calling, and I'm like, I wonder if there's something to that. So I was playing the call back and stuff. I try to stimulate him that way, but I'm like, I think there might be something to this. So I go down to that county and I'm searching, and sure enough, they're out. And not only were they out, but my tree frog helped me to find the population where they're breeding and where they're actually the most abundant. And this was a population in a county that had never been documented until 2021. So, I mean, this was a pretty interesting breakthrough that he helped me to find this. And it gets even crazier because a couple of days later, he starts calling again, and it's later at night. Usually they're not like that nocturnal. They're more crepuscular. So they come out like late evening, early morning, and they're calling the most. Well, I go down there, it's late at night, and sure enough, they're out again. So he was 2-0, and my pet, my rescued gray tree frog, who didn't even know that population existed, he's not even from there, 2 hours away, he's blowing the cover of these animals. And it's cool, because I go and it's kind of like I don't want to say a hunt in a negative way, like I'm not hurting the animals, but I'm looking for them. And like that's a big thing that I showcase in the Great Tree Frog episode is I strap a GoPro to my chest and I actually take people with me. You can find how I uncover these animals.
That's awesome, man. That's so fascinating. Super cool. Now, I was going to ask on the same topic of just frog calls and identifying and locating. Have you and the nonprofit linked up with Frog Watch at all, or no?
In Pennsylvania, there's a bunch of different surveys that are going on, and they're trying to find the distribution of the different amphibians and reptiles in the state. So I do help out with that, and that's where some of these were confirmed as like the first ever documentation. So I think that they must work with Frog Watch to some capacity, or Frog Watch can import their data. So it's more of a citizen science collaborative effort. One of the things the nonprofit we wanted to do at some point is we want to actually try to build our own map, and we want to be able to document our target species and give yearly reports about where these animals are and how they're doing. Of course, we want to mask the identity of like the exact location because you got poachers and stuff, but that's a big goal that we want to accomplish in the near future.
How much has iNaturalist helped in all of that?
So this is kind of funny, but when I was getting into the detective work and searching for these animals, I used what the state was actually funding. There's a thing called the Pennsylvania Amphibian and Reptile Survey, and I was looking at the distribution in real time through that. All of the information from iNaturalist gets funneled into this. So regardless on what's on iNaturalist, it'll show up on the Amphibian and Reptile Survey that's going on in the state until 2027. So I'm just looking at that, and I'm trying to see where can I contribute to fill in the gaps. What can I look for? There's animals that people might not think are interesting or important, but to me, I have that fascination with some of these animals, and I wanted to be the first to find them. And like you're talking about owning corn snakes. I mean, imagine if you're the first person where you live to find a population of corn snakes, how crazy that is, because you keep them and you care about them, and now you're out there helping conserve them. So like that takes it to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Our good friend Scott down in Australia wanted to know if you ever use iShine for locating. That's
a great question. Let me give a shout out to the people in Australia, because I love Australian frogs too. If I wasn't doing Northeast, I'd probably want to do that. Tell Scott that I have some green and golden bell frogs that I'm working with in my Australian tank, and would love to see him go over and check out some of those videos. Let me know what I'm doing right. Let me know what I'm doing wrong. Would love to link up with that guy. But yes, eye shine won't work for tree frogs usually because they're so small. Just to see their eye shine, you have to be like looking for a needle in a haystack. But for pickerel frogs, yes, exactly. You have to for pond frogs, but even for American toads and sort of even wood frogs, I don't technically need to, but that's an option. I mean, I have a very powerful spotlight. I have a red lens cap for, and I can see the eye shine perfectly with that. I also use audio calls and all kinds of things at my disposal. I also try to check water temperature. I'm doing a lot of crazy stuff out there, but getting some interesting data.
Yeah, I mean, hey, there's no such thing as bad data. So at least when you're collecting it, I'll say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if you have questions about Australian frogs, Scott and his wife Ty are definitely the ones to ask. They literally wrote the book on it.
That's awesome.
So
Yeah, no, I'm glad you shared that with me. Yeah, I think they're fascinating too. I mean, they're not in Frog Week this year, but it'd be pretty sweet. I'm hoping that that's in the cards for next year to have some discussion about some exotic frogs. Now that this is a collaborative project, we can kind of open it up a little bit more. But yeah, the bell frog and the White's tree frog are two of my favorites out there in Australia. So yeah, shout out to that. I mean, that's a pretty awesome tank. I got a 125 gallon for those guys, and native plants from Josh's frogs, Australian plants. A couple are, I guess, even invasive out there. But anyway, I could talk about this like all night about the Australian frogs too. So I don't want to do that. But yeah, man, it's a lot of fun out there. And it's not even necessarily for me herping because I'm taking field notes and I'm trying to do some of this stuff for school and also for the nonprofit. And the thing is, I think that this is the most important thing I could offer here to anybody that keeps these animals is like if you're asking me a question about them and their husbandry and their diet and their lighting and all these other things, I've been out there for over 5 years now, and I've been seeing a lot of different populations of American toads and other native species. Imagine what that has done for the animals that I keep in captivity and why they've had such a good life or why they're doing so well, aside from the vet and aside from the stuff that I just genuinely would be doing because I want to be responsible. But just having that knowledge of where they live and trying to recreate that in captivity, it's even more fulfilling.
yeah, man, that's awesome. And in case people are curious, shout out to Nature for You in Australia, Australian Geographic Frogs of Australia. So there you go.
Boom.
Oh wow. I follow the Australia Museum on Instagram, so I check that out. I know they got Frog ID Week, so I'll be curious to see what he thinks. What's really interesting is a lot of these citizen science programs, a lot of these databases are now starting to publish results in a lot of the scientific journals. So I think that the scientific journals have opened up and been more I guess, interested in this kind of conservation because this is actually helping them to know where these animals are if they want to go and do different types of research on. So, it's a different kind of science, but I think that it's also very necessary. And I think it's a growing field if that makes sense. I think more people, more groups are going to be doing that as we talk about this in the near future.
Awesome. And Scott's actually in the group chat right now. He said there's actually a second edition out now. So keep your eyes peeled, kids. Hop online.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Well, he had asked too, what's the biggest sort of threat to some of these species? He asked about the pickerel frogs and the breeding window. Is it reduced due to habitat or distribution limitations, or is it an ecological adaptation?
That's a great question. Sorry, I don't know if that was my... Did you guys hear that? I don't know if that was my toad or what. Okay. She jumped in the water and it just like something made a noise. Anyway, so that's a really good question. So pickerel frogs seem to come out and breed in the 40s and the 50s, and they don't start the year breeding like the wood frogs do. I think that it can get too cold for them. So there's kind of a sweet spot, at least in Pennsylvania. When you get more south, I think that they just are more abundant and they're more common. There's a fun fact that the pickerel frog was used as fishing bait. I don't know how many people knew this, and it was so persecuted that the United States actually had to get in and stop it being used as bait because it was
wow.
declining.
I did not know that.
They're
That's
actually
crazy.
Yeah, they're one of the few frogs, and I don't know about all of the Southeast, but at least in Pennsylvania, they're the only species that has a toxin that it can actually burn your hands or it can numb your body. Like Brave Wilderness
Really?
showed when he
Wow.
licked them that he was going numb. Like your face will go numb, and it depends how far you take it. I mean, you'd have to be
Yeah.
really crazy to want to like start swallowing it or licking them and doing stupid stuff. But I mean, he kind of proved that to be true with the numbing. But the first time I ever handled a pickerel frog a couple years ago, believe it or not, my hands did actually start to burn. But after I think I'd handled them enough, my hands stopped burning, so I can pick them up now. But he's asking about the distribution of them. It's very, very challenging for me to answer that because I'm still learning about the distribution for these animals. They're really fascinating because they seem to be a mountainous species, but they're not tolerant to pollution. And where I'm at, there's a lot of acid mine drainage, so it kind of limits them as to where they're going to be at. But they're probably another species. If I had the room, I probably would own them or consider keeping them because they're just fascinating in their own right. They don't even use their tongues to catch prey. They have to grab it. They literally, it's like all in on the poker chips. They have to grab the prey and scoop it in their mouth, and they're just really interesting. High grass hunters, they usually are away from the water, but they are a true pond frog. So a lot of interesting facts about them. Their eggs can be golden, which is really fascinating too.
Wow.
I'm trying to find where they're breeding and see if I can help them to uh, maybe expand their distribution. I've been creating artificial pools all around my area, and it's worked for the wood frogs. We're going to try to target the gray tree frogs next, but I'd love to get into trying to help these pickerel frogs. Not that I think they're declining by any stretch. I think they're just so mysterious. You could be up 2,000 feet plus and you see a pickerel frog on a mountain, and it's like, well, how'd you get here?
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
could be, you could see it 1 second, and the next second they're gone because they're just so quick. So,
That's wild.
yeah,
Our good friend Patrick is in the group chat as well, and he's a little bit older than us. And he says that in the 1950s you could buy a box of frogs to use as bait. He bets those were pickerel, but he was a kid and doesn't really remember. And it's funny you mentioned that because I know that when I first moved to Florida many moons ago, somebody had, I was getting into fishing, and somebody had given me like their old tackle box, and there was a frog set.
lure.
Yeah, but it was one of the ones where like as you reeled it in, the legs would kick, right?
hmm
But this was old. This was, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 years old. It was still in the old like clamshell packaging. And
wow,
it was one that was very pickerel looking. It was like a southern leopard, and it was a big
yep.
bullfrog tadpole. And I never put two and two together. That's wild.
Yeah. So, I mean, they were really heavily persecuted, and it's crazy that nobody even thinks about it. Nobody even knows about it, but
Yeah.
that's why you don't see them as bait. Another thing, kind of sad, a little disappointing, is spotted salamanders were used too. And I don't know,
Really?
that's kind of rough to think because a spotted
Yeah.
salamander is like so. I don't know. To me, like they're just harm. Like, what are they gonna do? Like, it's you just throw it
Yeah,
into deep
they're
water. I
so
mean,
innocuous.
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
So
Wow.
you gotta be one sick bastard to want to put one of those on a hook, man.
I
yeah,
know, right? Jeez.
That's disturbing.
Very.
yeah. That's a species too. I know they're not a frog, but they've actually made it into Frog Week every year because they're at the vernal pool, and I'm an advocate for the vernal pools, and I think they're actually one of my favorite salamanders, if not my favorite, and I just find them a lot um, in different places, and they actually are declining in the southwestern region in Pennsylvania. So the work that I'm trying to do for the frogs hopefully can help the salamanders too.
That's
Oh,
great, man.
Scott said there's some really good texts and papers on amphibian reintroduction and survey techniques. Feel free to reach out, and I will link you up.
Oh, for sure, I'd love to. I'll say this, something pretty awesome. About 3 years ago, I started getting into this, looking at how do I create vernal pools? How do I create artificial pools? Maybe not vernal pools. Maybe that's not the best word because they're not losing water and the tadpoles are going to die by any stretch. I fill them up, but artificial pools. And I looked into these different research papers as to like what's a actual successful vernal pool or artificial pool and what's a failure. And I'd seen some pools that some of the different schools that I'd gone to had created, and all they had were green frogs and eastern newts. And the reason why that's significant is because the green frogs eat the tadpoles as they metamorphosis and they come out of the water, and the newts eat the eggs. So if you have those two species, you lose all your diversity. That's all you're going to have. Knowing that and understanding a little bit more about the habitat preferences of the wood frog and the American toad, I've tried to design my vernal pools or my artificial pools in a way that I thought they would come to it. And to give you a perspective of where these pools are, it had been about 4 or 5 years since we had seen wood frogs anywhere near the suburban neighborhood that I lived in. Even I live in, there's woodlands around us, but the wood frogs just weren't coming around. There was like they paved the roads and knocked down a few trees, but it was just fascinating that years had gone by, we hadn't seen a wood frog. Well, long story short, I take the first pool, put it in the ground, and I get like 3 egg clutches. And I thought, man, that's awesome. Like we're starting to make some headway. And I've continued to get the egg clutches every year now, and I'm starting to see the wood frogs. And you could see in episode 1, it kind of ended with a female wood frog who was gravid coming to the vernal pool, and there was a male there, and they didn't link up yet in the episode. I don't want to spoil it, but I mean, there are going to be eggs laid. And yeah, it's awesome. And now some of the neighbors that I work with to do this conservation are allowing me to put these same pools on their properties. And I'm really curious to see, can I get great tree frogs to come to the same pools after the wood frogs have laid, since wood frog tadpoles will be a predator of others. If they're gone after the tadpole's metamorphosis, will the gray tree frogs use the pool, or will the second round for toads? Or will I have to put in a second vernal pool and try to like play around and move the tadpoles from one out to the other? But I mean, that's different stuff that I'm starting to get into. So that way we can try to help expand and enhance the populations of these animals.
Are you adding anything to those pools, like leaves or anything to?
Yeah,
Like
lily
with
pads
dart
or
frog tadpoles, we added like almond leaf and things like that to help raise the tannins and stuff. Do you do anything like that with these?
Well, I think the most successful things you can add are actually some type of a marginal or a pond plant. So if you're using water lilies or pickerel weed or some type of, I think it's a sedge, but don't quote me on that. Um, anyway, I actually have those in the vernal pools, and there's always leaves that fall in. So I don't necessarily have to do that where I put my pools. But if you're jump starting it, yeah, I would think maybe a couple leaves from different plants, and mostly the pond plant, because that's going to allow the tadpoles to eat. They'll eat the bacteria, they'll eat all the different stuff in there that is living, and the plant will encourage all that stuff. But you're also creating an opportunity for insects to reproduce as well. And mosquito larvae and other creatures for carnivorous tadpoles, that's a heaven for them, because now we're giving them free food.
yeah. That was actually a question I was going to have. Is down by me, everything that's standing water that gets dumped daily. I mean, we have it rain every single day, especially in the rainy season. And every single day, if you've got a flower pot that have water, you dump it, because some of the species by me, a mosquito, they only need 48 hours, 72 hours to gestate and hatch.
Yeah.
So do you have any issues with pools that are not used by amphibians that happen to grow nuisance insects, or no?
Well, I'll tell you what, one thing that's really interesting is, of the wood frog eggs and now tadpoles that I don't have any problems. Like, I go up there at night to manage it, and I'm also starting to try to get into raising like pollinators, like solitary bees up there. I've actually found that American toads might actually be eating them and wood frogs in their native range. So I'm trying to introduce that as a pollinator and a food source
Nice.
to the wild ones. But anyway, um, yeah, I don't actually have problems with mosquitoes in these artificial pools, and that's really fascinating. You'd think, oh, I'd be covered or something, but
Yeah.
they eat them. I mean, there are
Wow.
wood frogs right now, wood frog tadpoles, that are well over what they're supposed to be. Like, they should have already became baby frogs and gone, but I guess the quality is so good. I mean, they're getting so fat. Some of them are getting their legs and leaving, but it's just so funny how the water quality must be decent, and there's enough food that they're actually staying and getting, like, they're maximizing their ability in the water. And I think we're starting to see some of those offspring come back and start reproducing, which is just, it's awesome. It's really crazy
Yeah.
to see that.
Yeah. Now, you'd mentioned earlier that, say, like eastern newts were consuming eggs or tadpoles or what have you, and other competing species, competitor, excuse me. Have you thought about elevating the ponds and then having like ramps or stairs or anything like that?
It's a good question. So right now, two of the vernal pools are edited, or yeah, sorry, elevated. I'm actually going to try to get those in the ground because if you elevate them, it discourages American toads and wood frogs from reproducing. So actually, I'm doing them a disservice by having them above ground. I need to get those in the ground. But no, I mean, I have never had a newt come to the pools that I've built. I mean, I'm going to have to see what happens when I go out to the tree frog areas and find out, what's going to happen. I'm also going to probably put up some trail cameras because I use trail cameras to actually catch frogs and toads too. And I want to see, what predators are moving in. Do I got to fence it in? How
Yeah.
much effort do I really got to put into it? And I'm willing to go there. Like I'm willing to do what needs done, but that's just some of the stuff that I'm thinking about whenever I'm going to start these projects. And it's crazy, guys. Like I get like 15, 20 different phone calls and messages of people coming out like saying, "Hey, check out our property. What, maybe you could find something cool. And, we'd love to have a pond or we'd love to have some type of pool." So I'm taking those house calls in a way. So
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Now, just going back to the pools, are you using a like permeable liner, or are you just digging a hole, so to speak?
I dig a hole, and then if you go to the hardware store and there's little cement bins, they're rubber bins.
Hmm.
They're very heavy duty, very thick. I dig a hole and put those in the ground, and it's been about 3 or 4 years now. They're not looking like anything is affecting them.
Okay.
So, and I'm in Pennsylvania, and it can get
Yeah.
pretty crazy up here. But no, those seem to be the best way to go about it. I think they're about 18 gallons, so not terribly deep, not terribly long, just enough that I thought these animals would use them, and they are. So, I mean,
Yeah.
just trying to know what your species you're trying to target likes.
Yeah, because I just think about like some of the tanks I've had over the years for different amphibians and turtles, and having something that's not permeable or has its own ability to drain regardless, or has enough plant life. You get in excess levels of ammonia, you get in excess levels of phosphates and nitrates, and I didn't know if any of that played a factor or if it's just self-regulating because of the plants and the bioactivity that's in there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's a combination of this. It's out in the hot sun, and there's full sun that hits it, so it evaporates, and I lose a few inches of water. And if I don't drain that whenever it rains, there's too much water. So I mean, I have to actively keep up with these so the tadpoles don't fall out in a rainstorm or they don't die because the water actually does dry up. But filling it up with water and then the plants doing their part, that really makes a difference. I'll give you an example. The third vernal pool or the third artificial pool doesn't have anything, like no plants, and it doesn't have any leaves or anything. It's had algae blooms, and it's actually sadly killed off a few tadpoles because you just can't stop the algae from ravaging the whole
Yeah.
situation. But yeah, the ones that have plants never had algae problems, not once. So
Wow, that's incredible. That's awesome.
So the with the first episode, it was, I believe you were mentioning that was shot back in, I think, like February,
yeah,
but it was like snowing and you were seeing stuff in amplexus. Like how cold is that water, first of all? I mean, when I think of amphibians, especially frogs, they never stood out to me as something that would be actively out in super cold temperatures like that. And maybe it's because we don't really see that here, but
you
how
guys
does that
both
how
don't
does
really have wood frogs, do you? I mean, you do in the mountains in South Carolina, right?
probably upstate, I'm sure we would, but not down here that I'm aware of.
Yeah. What do you think the coldest temperature is that I've ever seen a frog at? This will be a good game here for you.
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
I'm gonna say that you've seen it like on the prowl, like hopping around, or
Yeah.
just like
Yep.
I'll go so far as to say at least in the 20s.
Oh, that's a whole different. You reminded me. I heard spring peepers calling in the 20s, but I didn't see them.
Really?
Yeah, 24
Really?
degrees on a
Wow.
February night. There were spring peepers calling. But what I was actually going to say, I saw wood frogs. This was Frog Week 2020. It was like March 2nd, It was 38 degrees Fahrenheit about 8 p.m. And it was pretty nuts because it was sleeting and it was cold, and it was like some of the deeper water, like there were spots in the edges that were frozen when I went to some of the ponds. But I'd seen it road cruising and was just so shocked that I had seen it. But over the last few years, it's not uncommon. I mean, the first episode, February 28th, there's an interesting thing that can happen on some of the mountains. We get like I don't know if it's a downdraft or what it's actually called, but it was 55 degrees on that mountain February 28th. And the rest of the area, once you get down even 3 or 4 minutes down off of that mountain, it was 38, it was 35, like really
Wow.
cold.
Huh.
So yeah, we were very fortunate to be up there that night, and we literally saw the wood frogs starting to come to the vernal or to the large pools up there.
And how
And
cold was it?
well, it was 55 that night, but I
Right.
mean, they were starting to get active in the 40s because the season was just so cold for them. I felt bad.
Wow.
It really caused a lot. Like, for example, that same population where I saw the first wood frog, they had one night for their breeding season, and that was it. It was one and
Wow.
done. 400 egg clutches or more.
And just for our non-American listeners, so 40 degrees Fahrenheit is approximately 4 degrees Celsius, and 24 degrees Fahrenheit is -4 Celsius. So
Yeah.
Right.
And the frogs were out.
it's wild.
But
man.
there was one part where I think there was tadpoles like swimming under ice,
Yep.
Really?
Yeah.
where it's just, again, like, to me that seems like you would not see any of that. Like, all of that stuff would be frozen solid or dead or buried somewhere,
Yeah.
for the time being. But
Those were green frog tadpoles that overwintered in that area, in that water. So surprisingly, the newts are also always in the water. I don't know. I guess they must brumate in the water too. I never really looked into them that much since, they're a predator of what I like. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the newts are always there. They're like first. I mean, they don't really seem to care. I mean, if it thaws out for a couple days, the newts seem to be in the water. But yeah, you wouldn't think that you would see these animals in a frost or in a heavy snowstorm. Like, I took people out we have frog walks in different locations, and it was this actually is going to be an episode 2. Okay, it's snowing and people are like, it's like in the 30s, we're not going to see a frog, Aaron's crazy. And I asked them that, I'm like, you guys think we're going to see a frog tonight? Nobody raised their hand. And so we get out there, and sure enough, the wood frogs are calling, the spring peepers are going nuts. So there's 2 years that we've done the very first frog walk of the season. And the first one last year, it was like a lightning storm, but a snowstorm too at the same time. So just
Wow.
imagine that, like, you got sleet coming down, it's lightning, and then you're hearing frogs calling. That was an awesome,
Crazy.
yeah, it was an awesome experience. And then this year, it was just heavy snow and it was coming down, and the wood frogs and the spring peepers were going hard. So I told them, I said, all right, guys, so when you Google, do you see frogs in the snow? You guys can all look at Google and say, no, you're a liar. Like, there you go. We got the documentation. They're out here. It's snowing.
Yeah, that's wild, man. I remember there was a picture from some, I don't know if it was Reptiles Mag or maybe National Geographic or something, but it was, when there's like a thin layer of ice that's basically frost, that like thick frost, and it almost makes like an ice sheet, and it stays in the shade, it stays nice and frozen, but there's like air pockets underneath it, and everything else is melted, but in the shade there's still like those sheets of ice. There was a famous photo of red efts like just basking on top of that ice sheet in the shade, and it's kind of deceiving because it could probably be in the 50s and the ice is still sitting there, but still, like, I always wondered, like, man, like they come out in that, like, that's wild.
Yeah. And the spotted salamanders, pretty much everybody does, at least like the early risers. So yeah, that's an amazing thing. And you're talking about Reptiles Magazine. Shout out to them. I mean, they actually started sharing some stuff on Instagram too for Frog Week. I thought that was awesome to see. But yeah, I've been a fan of them too. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy. You think about the cold tolerance of these animals, the ones that are in the Northeast.
yeah,
We don't necessarily have the diversity in the South, but we just have animals that are so resilient. And even in that, I mean, they have their own right of being fascinating just with that. Why is there just American toads in the majority of Pennsylvania, and you have 7 down south? I mean, they're very good at what they do. And,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just find them fascinating.
because I mean, down here, I mean, I'm sure, Phil, it's the same for you. I mean, well, maybe not because I get more of a winter than you do, but
Yeah, for
like
sure.
here when it's winter, and I mean we have mild winters compared to that. It's rare if we get really much further below freezing in like the middle of winter. But I'm not hearing anything. Nothing's calling, nothing's moving. I'm not seeing anything. Like it's a complete opposite. Like there's none of that going on. You know, you'd be the most you'll see during the winter here is gators basking if it's warm enough, and then the occasional black racer, and then maybe some anoles here and there. But we don't, amphibians and stuff. You don't see it. Like everything just disappears.
Yeah.
Now, I have a friend who is going to school at Clemson. He's actually in episode 1. I think you guys do have your frogs and toads come out around like late January, if I'm not mistaken, in South Carolina. I'm not exactly sure how far south you are, but where he's at, he was actually going back in time because the American toads and everything were already done calling by the time he came up in March in Pennsylvania to film them. So
Wow.
it was very different. But I've heard a lot of videos like people have sent in on to the different Facebook group chats, and they'll say, "Oh, our frogs are out," and it's like early February, late January, and you're
Wow.
Pennsylvania. You look outside and you see like a couple inches of snow, and you're like, "Well, at some point, right?
Yeah.
One of these days."
The only time I've ever experienced amphibians by me in any kind of brisk weather, because I'm so far south that we really don't get any of that. But I was actually small game hunting with some friends out in like the center of South Florida, like probably 2 hours from any real city. And it was like 60 something in the evening, and we found one southern toad on the dirt road. And then that night it dropped and it was like 32 degrees, so say 0 Celsius in the early morning. But it was just interesting, like it, the I don't know whatever happened to that toad, but he was out doing his thing before the drop. So that's wild.
You'd be really surprised to know that if you're going to get a cold front, sometimes the animals, and actually it's a lot of times, they'll come out and they'll actually do what they need to do before it happens, and then they'll leave or they'll
Hmm.
like hunker down. I've actually been out when it starts to change. It's a really weird feeling, especially up here because it can go from 50 to 20 or even colder than that. But they'll actually be out. It'll be a real productive night. And as the night starts to go longer and longer, you start to hear fewer of them calling. And then when you get late enough, they just all stop calling. And yeah, I mean, it's a really weird feeling, but it's also very productive. So you got to know when to time all of this. Like you're talking about snow and uh, changing the warm fronts and cold fronts, and understanding, well, how does the season for these animals, the breeding season, change based on the weather. I mean, it's a very you got to be really good at anticipation for these types of things.
Sure. Farmer's
Yeah.
Almanac.
I mean, how like we were saying before, we started recording and stuff. How important is stuff like those serious winters for amphibians up there, especially because down here, well, I was mentioning that with snakes, when I'm cooling them here in the garage in winter, because I don't have a fridge or something that I can set to 50 and leave it be, I'm completely at the mercy of whatever the season decides to do.
Yeah.
And lately, the last handful of years, we've had these weird spells where we'll have like a week in like the mid 70s in December, and then it'll drop down and we'll have like a serious freeze for 3 days, and then it'll go back to being in the 60s, and then in the 70s again it'll drop down. And like that, there's some species that I'm keeping that makes spermatogenesis and stuff very tough because they're not getting cold enough consistently to where I'm thinking of the bimaculata in particular, for anybody's curious. Like the corn snakes and stuff at this point being native, I feel like they're over time it's expected for them. Like they're like, okay, it's going to be winter, but it's not going to be like real winter. But with snow and stuff that you guys experience up there, like how important are those serious winters for those seasonal reproductions after everything's sort of started to warm up and things like that?
I think that they're very important. I think what's a more important thing that we're not really looking at right now is those warm spells, and then it drops. We go back down below zero, and sometimes And that's, I think, more devastating because there are certain species that could be detrimental to. They could just, if they wake up and they come out, like in February, we got a crazy, before that wood frog was active, before I'd actually seen wood frogs coming to the vernal pools, early February, we were having temperatures for Pennsylvania. This is unheard of, but like 60s. And it was like 50s at night, and people were going out herping, and they were actually finding salamanders, and they were finding different frogs that were brumating in ponds. And I'm like, oh no, because like if the toads dig up, they're done. Because I don't know if you knew this, but toads actually cannot freeze. They have to dig below the frost line when they brumate. So like American toads, they got to dig 18, 20 feet or more, or I'm sorry, inches, not feet, 18, 20 inches. That'd be nuts if they're 20 feet below, right?
Yeah, right. Jesus.
Yeah. But 18 to 20 inches or more, below the frost line. And yeah, it's pretty incredible. And if they were to dig up though, there's no way they're getting down that fast without eating, and just the way they would be, their state, so that's some of the things I think about. But you look at the wood frogs and the great tree frogs, they literally just hide under a log the whole winter and they don't care. They're just like, all right, let it hit me.
Yeah.
That is something I have wondered about just with our native species, when we have those just wacky winters that are ping-ponging between spring and actually being winter during winter.
Yeah.
How confused do they get when like they've been down for a month and then all of a sudden there's a week of warm weather and they're like, oh, it's time to come out and do our thing. And then the next following week it drops back down to being winter again. And they're like, oh shit, like, wait a second.
Well,
hold on.
I have some really interesting information for you for this. After doing this for 5 years, I've seen droughts and heat waves. And this year we had a cold spring, so we've actually seen it colder than it should be. What I've noticed is the ephemeral rain is the most important factor in all of that, because the ephemeral rain doesn't seem to come if it's too cold, at least for the wood frogs. And even if it rains, okay, it might rain here and there and it might be a heavy downpour, but it's not raining for days. And when I'm saying like the ephemeral rain, yeah, like it's raining for like a week or like 2 weeks. And even like this is actually something that happened during Frog Week this year. The conditions were right, but the wood frogs weren't at the vernal pools for a long time. And I'm like, well, why aren't they here yet? What's going on? It hadn't rained yet, even though it was warm enough. It was in the 50s and the 60s at night even, and they hadn't come. So once the rain started to fall, then they started to show up. And the same thing happens for the American toads. And then the same thing happens for the other animals later in the season. So you get those like cycles where you're going to get that like couple day long rainstorm. And that's actually what brings them out of brumation. And from my understanding, what takes them back to brumation. So they'll actually use the rains that come in the fall to go back to the brumation areas. And that seems to be more influential, and that gets messed up if it's too cold or if it's too hot. It can come very early in the year if it's too warm, and it'll affect the wood frogs because they'll lay their eggs early and then the pools will dry up and they'll die. But if it's too late, then some of the wood frogs, like this happened to me this year. There was a female, I didn't get the chance to show this in Frog Week, but there was a female who came to the vernal pool that hadn't mated yet, and she was sitting there for weeks and waiting for a male wood frog to show up, and they'd already shown up. So she was late, and she actually didn't get to breed. Last year, it was earlier. It was much earlier in the season, and there was a male wood frog who was calling and calling and calling for like 3 weeks. He wouldn't leave the pool, and he actually got a mate. It's a good story for him, but this year the female, we would have, and I was really disappointed because it's like, shoot, we would have had another egg clutch. All we needed was just another male to show up, and didn't make it.
Man.
Are you doing anything to manage those clutches when they happen? Like, are you doing anything to sort of protect them?
Yeah, I have a green like fence that's going around where these pools are. So that's sort of the first protection. And like I said, if it's a rainstorm, a lot of people might not think to do this, but once your pool starts to overflow, the tadpoles have a tendency to want to go with the water. So they actually would get washed out. The first year that happened to some of them, and I became very aware of that. So it's kind of funny because, people around me will look out the window and there I am like with a bucket in a rainstorm running out there to, drain the pools so the wood frog tadpoles don't fall out, or the toad tadpoles don't fall out of their pool. But I mean, there's that. You got to, make sure you're watering. You got to make sure that you're staying on top of things. If stuff dies in the water, like plants, you're kind of removing too much debris. I mean, there's a little bit more to it, but yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of success. I've had a lot of offspring breeding and reproducing, coming back, like all that. So
That's great, man. You're literally managing. You're managing a microclimate. You are no different than if it was herpetoculture in captivity.
yeah, and it's really cool whenever you start to see the offspring that you think, at least the offspring, coming back to then reproduce, because it's like, wow, they've made it. Like the cycle has actually
Yeah.
completed.
Yeah, that's
That's really
fantastic.
cool.
Yeah, especially something like an amphibian that has like that bona fide cycle. That's awesome. And just see it all come back to fruition. You were mentioning about the temperature fluctuations and it possibly ruining a breeding cycle or even killing certain species or certain specimens at the time, depending on the temperature waves. I remember there was, I don't know if it was a paper on the actual brumation of it, but there was something I remember about northern copperheads where someone had, I guess, put multiple trail cams and time lapse cameras on a den site, and they were noticing that one snake would come out and then never come back, but the rest of them, they would almost like take a look out and be like, nope, not yet, we don't trust it yet, and then go back. And even though it had been warm for 4 or 5 days, they didn't take the risk because they obviously were anthropomorphizing, but it was almost as if they were like, you know what, let's just see if this drops again before we leave, and I didn't know if you'd
Gotta be a
notice.
barometric pressure.
It's got to be, yeah.
I
I
think
didn't know
so.
if you'd notice anything like that with the toads or what have you.
Well, that's a really fascinating thing. I didn't know that about the copperheads, but I mean, I can see that being a real thing. I mean, that could be why American toads survived in the north, because you have to think there's just really crazy winters and springs that happen throughout history, and if that would have been the case and they all would have come up, you know, prematurely and they all died, then they wouldn't be here. But yeah, there might be a part to that. Like he was saying about barometric pressure. I mean, there's a lot of factors that we don't realize go into their decision making, um, when they choose to come up from brumation, when they stay back. Some of the animals, like the wood frogs, they kind of have it easier because they can just freeze and they don't care. But everybody else has to deal with what they're given.
Yeah. Overall, what's the not just in terms of amphibians, but also herps in general up there, but what's the biggest threat that you're finding to a lot of these species?
Probably the two main ones. The top one is habitat destruction, because the gray tree frog literally exists in small pockets. And if you cut down a mile or 2 miles worth of the trees, you might actually wipe out the entire population in one of the counties that I'm talking about. Like they could be gone from a whole county, and that could be a domino effect for other things. But that seems to be a big problem, because you start losing I mean, think of it from the spotted salamander's perspective. So they have site fidelity, which means that they go back to the same vernal pool their whole life. Well, what happens if they wake up, they go to the vernal pool, and now it's a Walmart or
Yeah.
it's somebody's backyard? Well, what do they do? Like, I don't know that anybody's documented what do they do next. Do they go to another vernal pool, or do they just lay there and like die? Like, what happens? I mean, that's a reality that people don't really think about. But habitat destruction is a very real and serious threat to amphibians and reptiles.
Yeah. That's our friend Brian in Arizona is going through that right now, over the past, say, 3 or 4 years with Gila monsters, because there's so much expansion in the Phoenix, Arizona area with suburbia coming out from, Phoenix proper, that these Gila monsters that would hibernate in the foothills, and then in spring they would walk down the foothills to, dare I say, a grazing area of like lowland desert. Well, they go to sleep and then they wake up and now there's a neighborhood.
Yeah.
So they're like, where did my feeding grounds go? Oh, you know what? I'll just swim in this person's pool, or I'll live under this person's trash can. So he's having to deal with that now. It's like, well, where are you going to relocate these things?
Right.
Because that one lizard has been walking down the mountainside for the past 10 years. Now, all of a sudden, there's a 5,000 square foot house or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a real problem. And I'm sorry to hear that, because they're actually one of my favorite lizards. And hopefully he can work with neighborhoods to do that, to get them to succeed and maybe plant things that were already there. That's like a big part of what I'm doing. So to give people an example, I know we're kind of far into the episode to talk about this for a second,
No,
but
go into it, man. Come on.
man, I look at this like, why not care about the abundant species? Why not care about some of the common stuff? And
Sure.
not that we don't care about the endangered, but if we can also help to prevent, like we were talking about,
Prevent
different
them from
animals.
becoming endangered.
Exactly. And so we want to be put in place to be able to help them. And one of the things that I do, and I think we've done fairly well, is we work with the neighbors around some of these places where there's deforestation. Because now, if I start breeding, or if I start putting the breeding grounds back in different yards next to where that's happening, maybe you can keep some of the population intact. And there's a big thing in the state right now with trying to create wildlife corridors. And even in my neighborhood, it's kind of funny because the neighbors had a pond and I never had met them or never knew anything about them for years. And this is like 7 years. We had an American toad breeding program, and now we're on year 4 of the wood frog breeding program. And I hadn't known what happened between the ponds, but I went up and talked to them, and we actually were able to, talk and have a friendly agreement and stuff. And they let me come now on their property and I can film things. But long story short, now we have a wildlife corridor from their pond to my pools to my mom's pond, and then they cross the street and there's a native, like a wild pond down the street, like a couple 100 yards away. So we're starting to create these wildlife corridors to help these animals where they had been declining for so long, and now all of a sudden the habitat's back. So what's going to happen? We've actually seen the toads are increasing, the wood frogs are increasing.
That's great.
I mean, that's something maybe that people listening to this, if you're into that type of conservation, try working with the neighbors. Because like people always approached me like, oh, why aren't you working with the state parks? Why aren't you working with the state? Well, for one, the state is not going to protect abundant species. That's not where their funding is. That's not what their interest is.
Right.
So what we're doing is kind of unorthodox. It's kind of like taboo right now in terms of conservation, because nobody's looking at the conservation of like abundant species. But if you work with neighbors, if you work with private property landowners, they have most say of what happens, especially if it's not like an endangered species. If we're building an artificial pool and we're monitoring that habitat, they don't necessarily care as much. But that could be something maybe somebody out there wants to go and start their own nonprofit. And like you said, for helping those lizards in Arizona, or if you're watching this from wherever and trying to conserve an animal, I mean, it's very important. Don't think that one person, well, I guess you'd need 3 to start a nonprofit, but one group of people isn't important. I mean, that's not true. A lot of these agencies and organizations and state agencies and everything, like they rely on a lot of nonprofits to be their hands in the conservation game. So
yeah, like our friend Peggy Ditmar in the Black Hills, she's doing native South Dakota pond turtles, and she's actively working with state biologists and state officials to captive breed specimens that were, dare I say, a nuisance or interacting with humans. She takes them, raises them, breeds them, gets all the vet stuff checked out, and then they do a re-release. So, and she's just, her and her husband, just 2 people, I think it's fantastic. Not to hijack conversation real quick, but so you're doing these animal corridors, and you're essentially making an easement for these animals to travel. And I know a few years back there was a study in Alabama and Mississippi about all these amphibians, mostly frog species, that were going to full metamorphosis, but with I don't want to say defects, but extreme aberrant or extreme abnormal, like 4 legs and like 20 toes, and it's all because of toxins in the water. Yeah, toxins in the water and agricultural runoff and pesticides. But the retaining ponds and the wetlands that had an easement to diversify gene pool, it almost fixed it to a certain degree. Obviously, it's not going to fix it because we're polluting the ecosystem, but you see where I'm going with this. So now you've made these easements, you've made these corridors, and it's just going to hopefully even diversify genetics and weed out any kind of bad crap that's in there. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and what I've really found interesting is that American toads, more so than anybody else right now that I've been working with, will actually use ponds that have fish in them. Like not game fish, but like, koi fish and comets, like goldfish and stuff.
Really?
They're actually, yeah, I mean, our breeding program has taken place. They more so like the pond. I don't know why that is, but the toads always will breed where the fish are, and I mean, their tadpoles will metamorphosis, and we'll see baby toads. I've seen a handful of baby toads already this year, so they have a high success rate. Um,
That's
yeah,
wild.
it's unbelievable. I never thought they'd do that, but I think they'd rather take their chances with my mom's pond fish than they would with the wood frog tadpoles,
Sure.
because wood frog tadpoles will eat all of them.
I think that's super interesting. And I wonder if it's regional because down by me, I used to work in big box pet shops when I was younger in high school and college and stuff. And one of the things that people would always say is that they have koi ponds or they have, a basin full of comets in their backyard with some water lilies because they don't want to go full koi, or they get some of those big eyed goldfish. And the cold water species of fish would produce in excess levels of ammonia and they wouldn't have any amphibians. And everyone's like worried about, oh, well, the fish are going to eat tadpoles. Well, no, there's no tadpoles, there's no eggs, there's no nothing because the frogs aren't going to there because the
Yeah.
cold water species are messing the water up. Meanwhile, you're up north where it is cold water species and they're loving it. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, 7 years that they've reproduced in the pond. I mean, last year we had 16 pairs of toads. This year we had, I think we had 4 or 5 egg clutches, or I'm sorry, spirals. But the reason why, I mean, it's a little unexplained, but I think it's fascinating. We also had the second round. So I don't know if you guys knew this, but some species will actually breed twice in a year. And
Nice.
American toads, I've only seen it twice so far in the 5 years I've been doing this, but um, it's not very common that they reproduce twice or even 3 times in a year. But yeah, they came just as strong as they did the very beginning of their breeding season. They came back, and that's really cool to see. But yeah, I mean, um, it's really like, so the second round, this one female American toad was scouting out the pond after she had her mate, and she actually laid her eggs directly in the center of the pond, like going up a lily pad. And it was really interesting that she chose to go deep and lay them and come up because there's fish all around. But I guess because my mom will keep the fish so well fed and there's other stuff in there for them to eat, they don't mess with the tadpoles. But yeah, it's really fascinating to see. I mean, these toads are swimming in like 1.5 to 2 feet of water, and they're graceful swimmers. It's just so funny to watch because everybody says, "Oh, they're not good swimmers and stuff," but there they are every year, 2 feet of water,
Yeah,
swimming, going in the waterfalls and hanging out and calling and
that's
wrestling.
awesome.
So it's really fun. It's fun to
That's
see.
so cool, man. So cool.
In the episode you dropped today, you also mentioned obscuring the locations of where you're doing some of this stuff from, poaching. Is collection a big, like, what species are people collecting to flip, or like what are people going after if they're out there collecting?
Well, see, this is an interesting topic for this podcast, so I don't want people to hate me for this, but in my location, there seems to be a couple people that are snake breeders that will go out and they'll actually field collect, and it's not legal to do it, but they'll put a bunch of these animals in a bucket, take them back to their house, feed them to these exotic snakes, and then they'll go on and sell the snakes. So it's not even necessarily they're trying to make a buck off of the frog; they're trying to get a cheap
Okay.
meal for their snakes. And if you take like a couple 5 gallon buckets a night and you're going field collecting, you can really just
That's a
wipe
lot.
out an entire population.
Yeah.
So knowing that that is happening, and and people are looking for that, looking to take advantage of that, that's why I have to be very careful about like not giving away the exact location, because they'll be gone. I'll go back next year and I won't see anything.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. It's a shame. It's a shame.
Yeah.
Well,
And
on a lighter note, are you eventually going to plan on getting Ace a boyfriend?
oh man. Yes. So the 240 gallon is my take on the years of seeing the field stuff and the habitats and where these animals are hanging out. But this is going to be a 2 biome enclosure in one. I want to see what their preferences are. Ace loves the water for American toads, you think, oh, they're away from the water, they don't want nothing to do with it. But she's always like, I know that for a fact that she's always in it every night. As soon as you change it, she'll go in it. If it's dirty, she sits there and looks at you and looks at it. She won't actually go in it. Really interesting that she won't too, because a lot of people kind of deem them as mindless, but no, she knows when the water is dirty. She's like, I'm not going in that.
Yeah.
But but so I have to be very careful, because it's not legal to breed native species in Pennsylvania. So if I wanted to breed her, I would have to work with the state and do like model reproduction programs, which I am open to trying to do. I do brumate my animals, so if they were hypothetically to reproduce in captivity, that's something I would contact the state and explain what happened. So I mean, I'm not gonna shy away from that, but I mean, I would love to. At the end of the day, I mean, it's not wishful thinking because it could become a reality, but I would love to, at the end of the day, give back to where these toads, because they're from around here. I'd love to allow them to reproduce and add them into the already reoccurring population of the toads that are out there, because that's where they're from. You know, they're all
Yeah.
kind of local. So that's kind of an idea. But yeah, I if I were to do it, I would definitely get her one or two males, so that way they kind of compete. And she has her selection like they would in the wild too.
That's great. That's great.
What parasites were you dealing with when you had to get her treated, or when you treat regularly? Do you know?
Yeah. How do you treat an amphibian? That's actually something I was going to ask earlier, and I slipped my mind.
So Rhabdius, the parasitic nematodes, are the main one. I think that they are a lungworm. And then there's also one that lives in or maybe they're intestinal. There's a lung one and there's an intestinal one, and they will attack them. The nematodes, the parasitic nematodes, are the main threat, because they seem to always be there. They seem to always be in some type of abundance, whether they're not attacking the animal currently or they're like, high load of their parasites. But you have to use, I mean, the way I want to do it and the way that we've done it for the most part has been ivermectin topically. It seems to work, and I have to do twice. But I found it's very easy, mostly for the gray tree frogs and the smaller animals. If you put them on that dewormer, ivermectin's a really tough thing for them to
Ivermectin is a
take.
hardcore drug, man.
Yeah.
It works
That's
great,
wild.
but good lord.
And
yeah,
I can't imagine. Like, I'll be honest. It would scare me to dose that. It would.
Yeah. Well, I work with an accredited vet. Like, the lady came from like the Knoxville Zoo, and she has an education out at Ohio State. So I mean, she knows what she's doing, and she did save Ace's life. So I mean, if she saved her, I trust her enough to let her dose the stuff for the animals.
Oh no, I'm just saying I wouldn't. I could never. Even if I knew what I was doing, I still would be afraid to. Just because that shit is so potent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of a risk to do that, but here we are.
So now you mentioned topically. So are you like? Is it? I mean, obviously we're using layman here, but are you like putting a drop of it on the site of the nematode, or is this? How are you administering?
So, for example, I think the best one would be Ace. So she's a big, robust female American toad, and they take a lot of stuff in through their skin. So if you put it on their back topically, it'll run down, and it'll at some point run into the skin, run in, and they'll soak it in. Well, that seems to be one of the best ways for ivermectin. It seems to get into them. It's almost like giving them an IV, from what I was explained. So that's the way that I go about it. Like I said, I know it's a risk, and there was one or two times that we did lose a frog because of possibly they had gotten it and it affected them. So also seeing how they're behaving, because then they'll stop eating for a little bit, or they'll look sickly, depending on where their immune system is at the time, how high the parasite load is. There's a lot that goes into it. I don't want to discredit or disrespect zoos, but I really would like to think that right now I'm getting to a point now where I'm at least doing things like they would start to be doing. This would be like more of an amateur level or semi-pro type of a zoo type situation with this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. That's fascinating.
You want to hear something that might blow your mind and your listeners' mind?
Absolutely.
This is crazy. I just started this, and this is such a crazy idea that my vet actually might want to partner with me, and we might actually produce a research paper about this, depending on how it goes. All right, so are you guys familiar with the oyster mushroom?
No.
It sounds familiar, but
So you put it on pizza, you can eat it in soup. It's a mushroom that you get whenever you're eating steak and stuff. Like,
Okay.
I mean, there's morel mushrooms that you get usually at restaurants and stuff, but there's also oyster mushrooms. Okay. So what I found doing a lot of digging and just, I don't know, I'm on some weird stuff looking at how can I add things to my tank that are
Sure.
native and stuff. But anyway, so oyster mushrooms are native to Pennsylvania. And I don't know if you knew this, but oyster mushrooms, whenever they spread their, what's it called?
spores.
The spores. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So the spores will get into the soil and they'll get into like the bark and stuff, and they parasitize and eat nematodes. Like the mushroom kills nematodes. And I'm like, well, this is interesting because my animals get attacked by parasitic nematodes. So hypothetically speaking, what if we would introduce a native mushroom to this large enclosure and see what happens? Like, this would have to be,
Wow.
a large in-depth process, and I don't know yet all of the variables and all the things we're going to actually test for. But isn't that crazy that a mushroom could actually kill a parasite of a frog and potentially be a natural remedy? And maybe we don't need ivermectin if, this is wishful thinking,
so,
but
so you're not just using it as a preventative measure of the toad contracting the nematodes. You're talking about a toad living with the mushroom and
yeah,
curing it via
Yeah.
spore transmission.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. It's really crazy. Like, to me, that blew my mind that a mushroom could possibly offer that to a frog.
That's wild, man.
What's even crazier too is because they always show pictures of like frogs with mushrooms or toads with mushrooms.
Yeah, toadstool, man.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just interesting if you think about, well, maybe there's more to it than, just the little Halloween decorations or the garden decorations. Maybe there's
Yeah.
a reason why they're by the mushrooms.
Yeah.
Because maybe that's actually killing their parasites, maybe out in the woods. But
Wow.
here's something even crazier. I didn't plan this, but this 240 gallon that I'm building, this is a woods and forest media thing that's not like the nonprofits. It's actually mine. But anyway, the habitat that I'm trying to create is literally the exact habitat that a oyster mushroom colony would need to get started, because they need something to spread their spores while I'm going to have fans pushing and pulling air. They need a certain climate, a temperate species climate. Well, guess what? I have an air conditioner. It's climate controlled in here. It's cooler, but not too cold, and it doesn't get hot. So, I mean, this is literally like the perfect situation for these mushrooms to possibly grow. And if I can, and I can grow them and they start to establish in the tank, think of it like this too. So I'm really into like some isopod species, and I keep canyon isopods. If those canyon isopods and crickets and different things in there, like earthworms, if they start eating those mushrooms, the fruit that's actually in the tank, what's going to happen? And no, I don't know that anybody has an answer for this right now, but what would happen if like the frog or toad then turns around and eats that isopod that already ate the mushroom?
Right.
Could that get into the system of the toad and, kill the
Cleanse
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, man. Dude, you're talking legit full cycle. That's fantastic. Now, what about this? So I'm in South Florida, and we stay away from fungi. Like, it is the devil down here because everything is hot and humid. Black mold is everywhere. You blink and you're breathing in the wrong spores. Have you looked into any kind of, I don't want to say dangers of propagating this fungus in your home?
Start growing it on the walls.
Oh, that'd be really bad. But no, I've sort of looked into it, and it doesn't seem to be a problem because people will have the grow kit and it'll just sit in their kitchen, and people will
Okay.
literally just hang out and check on it, and there's no like keeping it contained in like a airtight type of
Yeah,
thing.
it's not gonna work. And I mean, we eat them, I get that, but like there's a big difference between eating the actual mushroom itself and breathing in spores.
Oh, I get that. Yeah. Yeah, I have to see how that's going to work out too, because you don't want that to be an irritant to the frogs and toads. But I mean, you'd probably assume too in the wild that they're getting those spores on them too. Maybe not to the same degree.
Yeah.
So I'd have to plan that out a little bit more if that were to happen, you know.
Yeah, and I'm sure if you woke up one morning and the entire enclosure was covered in little mushrooms, you'd have no problem yoinking some out and managing that.
Oh yeah, I mean you could eat them, you could sell them to other people. I mean, it's kind of a lucrative business there. You growing mushrooms in a toad tank. But yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah. It just goes to show you the group chat. Everyone's like, oh, people grow them. Like Patrick says, oh, the people grow them in their kitchen. And like, I'm not a mushroom guy, so I have no idea.
Yeah, I have a hard time eating stuff that grows on dead stuff.
Well, think about it like this for this tank. I've asked a lot of my friends this question, even my girlfriend. But so if I, and this is real, like I'm going to try to grow a native blueberry bush. I'm going to try to grow native cranberries, and also it's a swamp blackberry. It grows. It's like a small vining plant that grows in um, sphagnum bogs. Anyway, it's a edible blackberry that you can eat. So all of that is going to be growing in the tank along with these mushrooms. Imagine if I can start to get these plants to actually fruit, and I could get a lot of it. Would you actually, hypothetically speaking, if you were here, let's just say hypothetically, and I reach in and I go to the sink, wash it off and stuff, and I hand you something, are you going to actually take it and eat it, or would you be kind of weirded out that it was hanging out with my frogs and toads for a while?
Mushrooms, yes. Anything else, no.
Yeah, if you literally like, blackberries are my favorite fruit, hands down. If I came over your house and you were like, dude, this is Ace's tank. Look at this. It's got
She's got a whole garden.
And you were like, hey, I remember on the podcast, you said you like blackberries, and you reached in and plucked some and washed them off and handed them to me. You don't even have to wash them off. I know that enclosure's legitimately safe from all forms of nematode. I would have no problem with it. That's awesome, man. It's organic as hell.
You could package those and sell them at Whole Foods for $20 for a box of 10.
Exactly.
I mean,
put Ace on the package,
Yeah, exactly. No, for real. But I mean, that's something that we could possibly do. Some of these plants are what is it? Is it like self-fertile, or are they self-pollen? Like
Yeah.
they don't need to be pollinated by bees to actually produce their fruit. And I'm trying to figure out how to get them to start producing that fruit. Like the blueberry bush I got actually has ripe blueberries right now. It's actually in with Ace. But yeah, I think that'd be kind of cool. Not necessarily that I'm trying to use that as the diet for the creatures that live in the tank, but it's an added benefit, because you think about blueberries and cranberries, about how beneficial they are for us. Imagine if, there's a cricket in there, or there's an earthworm or an isopod, and it's eating all of that. I mean, I know that's not like a full part of their diet. That's why I have to use the gut load, but that's got to be adding something into the diet for the toads. It's at least got to be adding into their immune system.
Dart frogs, I think, are a great example of that. There's a bunch of supplements and stuff we give dart frogs in captivity, but in the wild, they're completely healthy and they don't get any of that. They manage to somehow pick it up from, whatever they're eating, or the soils, or so that's something that I always thought was really interesting. It's like Mother Nature doesn't give them vitamin A in a powder form, they're getting that some way or another. And it's like vitamin A is really important for darts and frogs in general, I'm sure, but it's like, what are we missing? Like, it must be something fairly simple, because if they're just living and they're completely healthy and there's no issues, like naturally they're getting all the things they need.
Right.
But, we got to give them artificial alternatives.
Yeah.
It's just wild. I don't know.
Well, I think go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say real quick that you could probably get away with, I mean, anybody who's taken a middle school science class, knows that you could probably, if you had the right flowering plant or the right fruiting plant, you could probably have plants that don't self-fertilize in the enclosure, and then have a separate one, say in your kitchen or in your backyard or whatever, and just get some sterile Q-tips and just twice a year just dust each flowers, just swap flower dust, and boom, there you go. I mean, I'm sure it's probably not that simple, but like I've seen that before, where people have the same species of orchid in their house or in their living room or greenhouse or whatever, and there's no bees or moths or anything to change it.
You have to be the bee.
You have to be the bee. So they take medical Q-tips and they'll roll it on 4 or 5 different pollen opened flowers and just swap pollen, and it works like a son of a gun.
Yeah,
So
that's a cool idea too. I
Yeah.
want to say this too. I want to make this a plug. So this project that I'm talking about with this big tank and Ace and the mushrooms and everything else, to get people excited, this is actually going to be a cinematic project. It'll have its own series coming out. This is probably going to be a thing for next year, but it'll likely be the first time ever that'll, like, for my brand, Woods and Forest Media, we're actually going to contribute to Frog Week next year, and we're going to add this as one of the episodes. So you're going to get a chance to see this documentary, and the whole goal of the documentary is to show people we're going to follow the American toads and wood frogs for a year. We're going to follow them from
Wow.
the start of the breeding season to the end. But here's the catch. So as things are happening in the wild, we're going to be able to show you what's happening in the tank. And I've been trying to get all of this data about how can I replicate, like, the climate, the temperature, the rainfall, all this stuff, and like even the feeders. Like, I'm trying to even find the right feeders for the time of the year. And so this is going to be a major ordeal. I mean, I've gone all in on this with spending the money I did on the tank and the stand in the background, and doing the research. Like, I have a good team of herpetologists and professors. So I mean, I spent 5 years like developing this project. I bought a Pocket 6K cinema camera for this. Like, I've bought a lot of stuff, and
Nice.
like I was sharing with you guys, I mean, it's a 2 biome type of enclosure. So we're going to have a sphagnum bog with a pitcher plant. I'm going to be hopefully
Nice.
one of the first people to showcase like a native ecosystem with literally like native plants from Pennsylvania. But we're going to see what's the preference of these animals. Do they like to hang out in the woodland aspect of the tank, or do they kind of like the middle area where it's like the marginal of the bog meets the woods? Like, what
Right.
do they actually like? And this could be a good teaching point for people about invasive species, about like competition of multiple frogs in the same enclosure. We could talk about pollution in some cases. Like, there's a lot of really neat stuff that can happen with this. And so I've been trying to just interest people, because this is, like, again, this has been years in the making of this project. And I really believe that I have like probably the perfect main character for the first year of this project in Ace. But yeah, I hope that it'll interest people. Like I said, a carnivorous plant, mushrooms, blueberries. I'm going to try to replicate a thunderstorm in this tank. Like, this is crazy stuff, and spent a lot of time trying to develop it.
Yeah, that's
It would also
fantastic.
be interesting too if you took like a toadlet and do the same thing, but see if there's an ontogenetic shift in terms of preference between the more aquatic, like boggy side of things, and then maybe the drier
Yeah,
woodland type deals.
brilliant, absolutely brilliant. That's awesome. I'm
I love stuff
legit
like that.
excited. Yeah, this
it's
is
awesome.
so great, so great. Actually, you know what you could do too is, I don't know if you have, whether it be for the media or for the 501c3, if you have some kind of Patreon or something to that extent. I know a lot of zoos now are doing like the zoo membership, right? You become a member of the zoo, they give you a member card, and a lot of it's for kids, to get them involved and help support, conservation and the zoo stuff. But they do a live cam, right?
Mhm.
So let's say they get a baby hippo, or they get a baby giraffe, right? And it's like, oh, here's Jeffrey Giraffe, and he just got born. Look at him wobble. And you can sign on any time of day, 365, anywhere in the world, and you can log in with your member ID that you're paying, $5 a month for, or whatever, and you can watch the baby giraffe on the live cam. You could do that with Ace.
Yeah.
You
You want to
know?
know something really crazy? So there's a guy who I work with in one of the jobs I have, and he pitched that idea about live streams. So right now, I would love to build the audience first, and then I would like
Right.
to see if we could actually get some people that are like super fans that really want to pay for that kind of material. But I think first, how I'd like to start it out is going live on YouTube and allowing people to see different aspects of this tank. So maybe you'd join me and you'd see a feeding video, or you would just see. I think people, with how big this tank is, would just want to watch it and see how like Ace and these other animals are in there and just kind of living a daily life, because it's so big that like they literally can travel to get to different resources. So that might even be interesting. I don't know if I shared this yet, but there's actually going to be 2 wood frogs in this tank. So how does the interspecies competition relate? How does this happen? Even with the other toads, The original goal was to have just 4, like 2 American toads and 2 wood frogs, but the way things have shaken out, there was a school that they shut down their herpetology program. I was contacted and I was reluctant to take it at first, but it's another female toad, so I'm hoping she gets along with Ace. So that adds another one in, and another toad who's actually out in the hallway is going to come in. But anyway, so it kind of takes the number between 4 and 5 toads and 2 wood frogs, which personally I don't like having that many, but I'm kind of at no choice. Like I kind of have to. But what's that going to be like for for Ace and the wood frogs? How are they going to coexist? And I think that these are all really interesting and important questions that people will have the chance to see. And even from a live perspective, I'm also looking at the idea of having 2 different webcams so people can see different angles whenever I go live.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at. Is if you have a 250-gallon tank, what is it? Is it 6 or 8 foot long?
I wanted it to be 8, but I couldn't fit it up the steps, so we had to make it 6 foot 9 inches.
Okay, all right. So you have a 6-foot enclosure, right?
Yeah.
They have such tiny little live stream cams now that you could have one on, let's just say, for general purposes, you could have one on the hot side, one on the cool side, and then one that's looking kind of fish-eyed at both. And there are people that they can't sleep at 2 a.m. Oh, let me just see what Ace is doing at 2 a.m, right? Or their morning routine, they want to have a cup of coffee and just sit and watch Ace in the morning.
Yeah.
I mean, crap. People watch.
That's something we would put on
videos.
at work and just periodically check it on while we were.
Yeah, exactly.
We do that with snake eggs all the time. Like I have a Wise camera, and when I have stuff hatching, I have the camera on it, and I'll check in while I'm at work on my phone, and me and my coworker will be like, "Oh, did that one come out yet?" It's like, "No, that one's moving around." Like, so like that kind of stuff. Yeah, even if nothing happens, you're still like.
Now I've got security cameras already on the majority of the tanks that I have. I only have 4 tanks at the house here. But I also want to try to get into live streaming a little bit. I don't actually normally do that, but I just think that this is the actual project to do it with. So
right.
Yeah, I would love to invite people to check some of that stuff out.
Man.
We got a pet care show as well. It's more so geared for people that keep some of the native stuff. And of course, I was talking about love for the Australian stuff too. So people might be interested in checking that out. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff going on, and you're looking at it from somebody else's perspective who, I'm in grad school and I'm a field, I don't want to say researcher, but like I'm doing field work and, doing a lot of work on these animals outside. So, I mean, I'm trying to bring that inside, and it might interest people.
I would say with full confidence that you are a field researcher, regardless of your employment or your educational status. You're 1,000% doing field work.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm trying, man, there's so much we could talk about with that and maybe I can come back and be a guest for that too.
Hell yeah, man.
I mean, man, I'm doing a lot with like reverse osmosis systems and rain barrels and looking at trying to actually make this tank hybrid energy. I mean, this is some crazy stuff that I'm trying to accomplish with it.
Look, not to sound preachy, but coming from someone who did not do what you did, or what you're going to do, I should say, document everything, man. Just document everything. Because even if no one cares, someone's going to care.
Yep.
I mean, we got you guys that are going to follow it and be interested.
Absolutely.
So.
1,000%.
Well, I mean, coming from the dart frog world and knowing how hardcore people are about that kind of information and how like they can make the tanks better and more self-sustaining, even if they're already super self-sustaining, like that kind of stuff, like people want to know. And there's plenty of information from that too that people can take and carry over to other herps, not just amphibians. Like I know there's plenty of people that are keeping snakes and lizards and stuff that would absolutely take some of that information that is applicable and run with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think all of this relates back to like, frogs and toads out in the wild and at home, like being, for me, like, they're, I don't know, that they feed off of each other, because like I'm getting so hyped seeing these guys in the wild and coming home and getting hyped seeing these guys at home, and it just kind of feeds itself and continues to grow my passion for doing this stuff.
It's great, man. It's great.
So what's the game plan moving forward in the next year, 5 years?
That's a great question
that you got targeted.
Yeah, so I don't think we talked about this part of it yet, but I actually am also into detective work with trying to document and find species, but like learning, like I said, I do a lot of work with neighbors, but like meeting people who know someone who knows someone who knows someone. And
Networking, baby.
yeah,
Networking.
exactly. Because somebody has something on their property that nobody else knows about. And
Sure.
I'd love to be the first to find that. And we've done that. We've actually made some novel discoveries, but it comes with trying to network. Like I think a good example is Jeremy Wade on Animal Planet. You know, he's doing river monsters and stuff. And what does he
Yeah.
do? He goes to the bar, he goes to talk to neighborhoods, like, and he's asking the people that live there. And that's sometimes, and most times, the real like way that you're going to find if something exists. It's not, you know, necessarily even going to look in where the geographical regions are. You go and ask, hey, have you seen this? And they'll say yes or no. And a lot of times you'd be surprised, but they're right. So to answer your question, I'd love to find populations of lizards in certain areas where I'm close to in Pennsylvania, because up here you say a lizard and people are talking about a salamander. Well, I'd like to kind of change that narrative and say no, like literally a lizard, like here it is.
Yeah.
Gummy lizards.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean skinks, 5-line skinks would be probably the main one, and then the northern leopard frog is still elusive and it's something that I'm still trying to hunt down. It's one of those species. The Fowler's toad is another one. Even though they're very common for you guys in the
Yeah.
south, they used to be common in Pennsylvania, but they've been declining and they're only found in certain counties, and they used to be more abundant. But I'm trying to look for different populations of different frogs and toads. And to give you guys an example, this year it was a complete accident, but we found these people where we found the second population of great tree frogs in the county I'm from. We also found the very first population of map turtles. So,
Wow.
Oh, cool.
That's awesome.
I mean, it just, and it was a complete like accident and it happened, but we're trying to, like I said, make some novel discoveries and try to find different things that exist where they maybe shouldn't. But you asked me about a 5-year plan. I mean, after I graduate this May, I'd like to see where that takes us. I don't know. We'll just have to kind of see. I mean, I'm open for working and doing whatever. I'd like to do conservation if I can get the channel big enough, or if I can get enough funding from the nonprofit. Like, I mean, I would love to make that my job long term. Like,
Sure.
we're looking at the end of the day, like 10 years from now, because I can do more for the animals I'm trying to conserve with the nonprofit than I would for anything else.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I mean that
Yeah, man.
I mean that is kind of an ulterior goal, but I would like to get a career doing something in the biology field, and you know, try to be there to help some of the animals.
Yeah, man. You're a Keystone native?
Uh like PA, yeah.
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 That's great, man. That just adds to
Yeah.
the story, man. I love it.
Yeah. So I mean, really passionate about like even the like not just the frogs and toads, but like I was talking about the pitcher plant and all the
Yeah.
other creatures too.
I didn't
Yeah.
even know you had those up there. I didn't know that they were native.
Yeah, we've got a few carnivorous plants, but the purple pitcher plant's the only like actual pitcher plant. So, yeah, I just always found it fascinating, and I take that out with me actually to go and present to kids. And one cool fact, I don't know how many of your viewers knew this, but they actually have a symbiotic relationship with many frog and toad species.
Sure.
So they won't eat frogs and toads unless like there's an accident on the frog's part. But like tree frogs, mostly the hylids and even the chorus frogs will sleep in pitcher plants, and they'll use them as a refuge. They'll actually eat inside of them, and the plant gets fertilized by the frog's poop.
Mm-hmm.
So even
Yeah.
though the two species that I'm going to have my pitcher plant in with don't use it, it's still somewhat, you know,
Relevant. Yeah.
yeah, it's relevant for frogs.
You may not know that. You may see something that no one else has seen.
That's a good
You'll
point.
look up and Ace will be hanging out in that thing, and it'll be
Yeah.
drooping over.
If
Well,
she gets in there, it's a problem.
He'll just
Yeah.
be loving it.
Yeah, man. That's so great. That's so awesome. Yeah. I was actually going to ask real quick too, is you were talking about, you know, the grays and finding out populations of gray tree frogs. Like, is there specific type of trees? Like, is it more of a deciduous, or is it coniferous, or like, do they only live in oak trees? You see what I'm getting at here?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So it seems to be a mixed forest does the most for them in
Okay.
like the north, at least for where I see. It doesn't seem to matter as much about elevation, but I don't know if you knew this either. But eastern gray tree frogs, the range ends in Virginia. They've actually started to pop up in North Carolina because they came in on plants, but they're more so a cold tolerant species.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting you think that, because a lot of people I talk to, they're like, oh, a tree frog, you think it's exotic, you think it's like a Florida species
Yeah.
or something.
Or
But
they think of red eyes.
yeah, but these animals are actually semi freeze tolerant. And not only that, but they seem to right now be coming out of where there's a lot of deforestation happening, which is why, like we talked about that first, and why I said that's a problem, because they're coming out of places that are being timber harvested, and we're finding them as that's happening. And that's actually part of the story of the great tree frog that I have, is he was at one of those populations, and I had a choice to make, like, do I want to rescue 14 toads and like 4 great tree frogs and take them to a pond that's about 100 yards away, or do I just leave them there because it's the
Yeah.
end of the night from my field work? And I made the decision to go and move them, and that's kind of the story. You'll have to see how his name's Esperanza, how he ended up with me after that. But um, yeah, I mean, a mixed forest, because there seems to be pines. There seem like hemlocks. Hemlocks up here in Pennsylvania are still a thing, and they mixed in with a lot of the deciduous trees appear to be where the habitat is at. I also found out this year that they also will utilize bogs, which I didn't necessarily think, but they'll go to the sphagnum bogs and they'll reproduce as well. So anything that seems to be flat, I mean, they're vernal pool breeders, so it makes kind of sense whenever the water in a bog, is up here and then it kind of drops. So, but yeah, so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking, you have so many different avenues, whether it be other species of reptiles like the map turtles, and then other amphibian keepers and carnivorous plant keepers and tree people, and like you're linking it all together, man. I love it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm trying to. I really want to build a good network of people that care about these different things. Another thing that we didn't even talk about, this kind of goes for the nonprofit and for what I'm doing, is ants. So I'm actually looking to breed a colony of ants and use them some point whenever the colony gets big enough to drop into the tank and allow the frogs and toads to hunt them, because that's a big part of the diet for American toads and wood frogs. But you'd be surprised to know, like, ants are a lot of seed dispersers in the wild, and
Mhm.
again, they're a big food source for these animals. And they also, I don't know that they pollinate, but I think they contribute in some facet to that.
Sure.
So yeah, we're
God.
actually trying to help ants as well.
Formicary is a rabbit hole that I've been tempted to go down, but I'm really scared to, because I know it'll get out of hand.
Yeah,
That
right.
whole world, man, is just so damn cool. Like, there's a couple of accounts on Instagram and stuff of people that do the ant farm thing, and
Dude, that's, and like those guys, it's not an ant
so
farm, it's an
freaking
ant
cool.
city.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so cool.
I'm hoping to
So-
build one of those too, next to the big tank, so that way they can go into each other.
Yeah, that's wild, man. Wild.
Yeah, yeah, man. There's a lot of cool stuff. Like I was talking about the solitary bees. That's another part of it. We were talking about the pitcher plant. I was involved in bringing them back to another location where they once existed, and they offered me one of the plants that somebody had been growing for like 25, 50 years. I'm like, heck, I'll
Wow.
take it. So the plant's like as old as I am. It's in its 20s, and I'm like, well, here we go. We got the centerpiece for the big tank. It's
Wow.
a
Yeah,
massive pitcher
wild.
plant. But yeah, we're doing stuff with all kinds of target species for the nonprofit. And I think it interests a lot of different people, because there's so many things. If you like bees, if you like ants, if you like different plants like carnivorous plants, frogs and toads, we got bats on there. So I mean, we got a lot of different stuff.
That's great, man. That's
Love
so
it.
great.
Well, if people want to get in contact or stay in the loop and keep an eye on what's going on, where's the best place for people to do that?
Well, if you want to learn what we're doing with the field work and you want to follow a lot of the Frog Week stuff, then definitely the website for PA Woods and Forests. That's the nonprofit. So that's, let me see, I'm telling you my head wrong. So that's this logo. If I move, you'll see the logo there. That's the nonprofit logo. And then if you want to learn about the different shows that I'm doing on YouTube, I look at my YouTube channel like it's a streaming platform, because I have friends from all over the country that are actually participating in the podcast or the hiking show or even the pet care shows. So, I mean, we have a lot of different categories, and I do look at it like it's a streaming platform, allowing people to have freedom and encouraging people. Maybe you don't like hiking, but you like frog conservation, or you like seeing pet care videos, or you like podcasts like this. So, I mean, we have a lot of different stuff that we do. You can't really see my logo. Oh, this one, yeah. So that's the Woods and Forests Media logo. But you'd be able to go to the YouTube channel and the Instagram and see a lot of the stuff that's happening there. One thing for you guys to note, if you're interested in both, there's a blog on the PA Woods and Forests website, and there's actually a blog featuring the 240-gallon tank. It has its own section. So if you want to check that out, you can kind of follow that, and you can see, because I'm active on there. I try to give updates frequently.
That's awesome.
So yeah, if you guys watch this and you're going to follow that, check out the blog for PA Woods and Forests. You'd be able to see pretty much anything that's going on between the two. So that's probably what I would recommend is checking out the website for PA Woods and Forests, and checking out the channel for Woods and Forests Media.
And if there's anyone in that your neck of the woods that wants to get involved or help in some way or another, is there a way they can do that? Just get in contact with you through those, or?
Yeah, I mean, anybody that's out there, if you want to send us some pictures of frogs and toads and see if we can help identify them, especially if you're in Pennsylvania, or if you think you have, a northern leopard frog in your backyard, or you think you have a great tree frog or something, take some pictures, take some audio, and on the website we actually have a Gmail, and you can send it to us through our Gmail, and I'll get that notification. Or you can, I think, if you're on the phone app, you can actually send a message directly to the nonprofit, and I'll get that as well. So there's a lot of cool ways you can get in contact with us.
Nice.
And somebody will reach out and try to connect with you.
Awesome.
Well, this was a great episode, man. We really enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, this is just what I needed, man.
All right, guys, when's the part 2?
We'll make it happen, man. Like,
Absolutely.
I gotta go see what this tank's looking like. I'm super curious. So,
yeah,
there will most definitely be a return. So this was episode 172 of Snakes and Stogies, brought to you by BlackBoxCages.com, FullViewsApparel.com. If you end up getting anything on both at checkout, use the discount code THN. Save yourself some money on a Black Box cage. Save yourself 15% on FullViewsApparel.com just for THN listeners. We'll be back Thursday for THP, as far as I know. Daytona's coming up soon, so we're going to do sort of a pre-Daytona show here soon within the next 2 weeks. Can't freaking wait.
It's going to be so good.
Yeah, so check out all those things, and then Puget Sound Pythons, give them a follow on Facebook, Instagram, hunt them down on Morph Market, see what they've got for sale, give them a follow on there as well, and we appreciate everybody. Thank you.
Bye.